So good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Ulrich, and I work as a professor at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And my longstanding interests are in interreligious dialogue, comparative religion, and so on. And I've had a longstanding interest in theological and philosophical interests of Sri Aurobindo Ghos's work. But over time, these interests have developed into an interest in his political involvement. And so what we'll be looking at here is his early approaches to Islam. And you may be wondering, why take a look at this issue? Well, in 1992, there was the destruction of the Pave Masjid. And in the wake of that destruction, there was some renewed scholarly attention given to Aurobindo and other figures from that era, asking the question, how did they contribute to today's situation? And in terms of some scholarly criticism of Sri Aurobindo, the harshest critic has been a political scientist named Jyotirmaya Sharma. And his book, Hindutva, he argues that Aurobindo's contribution to the rise of political Hindutva is second to none. And if that is indeed the case, that is quite an irony. Not that ironies don't exist in history, they certainly do, but it is an irony because last night we were having that discussion of Auroville, a town intended to show how many different peoples and cultures and races and so on can all live together. And in the nearby Aurobindo ashram, the idea is to go beyond religion altogether and the different disputes and conflicts and issues among religions to a transcendent spirituality. And among people interested in interreligious dialogue, there's been a long history of interest in Aurobindo. And in that regard, I mentioned a relatively recent book by Richard Harch, The Clasp of Civilizations, in which he attempts to draw insights from Aurobindo's work in terms of how different peoples and religions can live together harmoniously. So the most recent biography of Sri Aurobindo is not entitled The Life of Sri Aurobindo, but rather The Lives of Sri Aurobindo, because his life was long, it was very complicated. There were many different phases and stages that he went through. So I'm just going to look at a small snapshot, a small slice of his life, the period of his open political involvement, and a little history that I'll give here, which is probably review for many of you, maybe all of you. But in Bengal in the late 19th century, the early 20th century, there was the Bhadralok, the Hindu middle class that had many new economic opportunities, political opportunities, educational opportunities, and so on. And the British administrators were rather concerned about the Bhadralok. They were afraid that the Bhadralok might influence English opinion back home and thereby interfere with the British rule of India. So in 1905, the British partitioned Bengal for that and other reasons, partitioned it into West Bengal and East Bengal, and combined East Bengal with Assam. And that weakened the Bhadralok. But at the same time that it weakened the Bhadralok, it weakened them because they were now a minority in both West Bengal and East Bengal, no longer a majority. While weakening the Bhadralok, this gave opportunities for others in the society. Assam, for instance, which was materially depressed, had new resources that were formerly belonged to Bengal. And there were new opportunities, presumably the possibility of new opportunities for Muslims in terms of political, educational, and so on. So naturally, the Bhadralok were not happy about the partition. And so there was the Swadeshi movement, the boycott of British goods and the patronage of indigenous goods. And they considered the partition to be a great insult to the land of Bengal and to the culture of Bengal. And in the Indian National Congress, there was that divide between extremists and moderates, the extremists trying to transform the Swadeshi movement into a nationwide movement for political independence. So where was Aurobindo in all of this? You know, he was an extremist in the Indian National Congress, and he was also the chief editor of the revolutionary newspaper Bonde Mataram, which did a lot to promulgate extremist ideas and ideals. And in terms of his approach to Hindu-Muslim relations, I will discuss this in terms of ideals and realities. Very interesting that this issue of ideals and realities came up in last night's discussion as well. And in terms of ideals, he had an early editorial in Bonde Mataram called Last Friday's Folly in late 1905, in which—
Hey, Ted.
Yes.
So sorry. I think your slides are not being shown as you're speaking.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one.
Or if you want, you can send me your slide to me.
Okay.
Well, you can just, as you're speaking, maybe remember to advance the slide that you're talking about.
Okay. So Patrick, can you see that? The Mohammedan, the Hindu, the Buddhist?
Not yet. I just see you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the best thing is rather just for me to keep on speaking here. If I try sending this,
Okay.
It'll probably break up my flow here. I'll just try one more time. Is that visible?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Thanks, Patrick. All right. So in this 1905 editorial, Last Friday's Folly, he said that, the British were saying, India consists of many different peoples, many different religions, many different cultures, and that does not constitute a unity. And if you don't have a unity, you can't have a nation. And if you can't have a nation, you need external rule. And Aurobindo tried to turn that argument on its head and said that our history, our uniqueness, our identity as a nation is that we have always been the meeting place of many different peoples, many different nationalities. So that diversity is our strength, it's our asset. And furthermore, he argued that in a free, independent India, that many different religions would all have their contribution to make. The Mohammedan, the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Christian in India will not have to cease to be Mohammedan, Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian, but each community will have its own contribution to make. So that is the ideal, but I will go ahead and talk about realities. And in that regard, I'm going to talk about one of Aurobindo's contemporaries here, the Nawab of Dhaka, Salimullah Khan. And Dhaka became the capital of the new East Bengal. And naturally, that was a great windfall for Salimullah. And furthermore, he had a financial relationship with the British. They gave him a considerable loan to help cover some of his debts. And he was campaigning both before and after partition for support for partition. And that campaigning had receptive ground. As I said, partition had its advantages for Muslims. Furthermore, there was resentment against Hindu landlords, and the Swadeshi movement had its disadvantages. In particular, the local products tended to be more expensive and of lower quality than the British products. And if you are a peasant, either Hindu or Muslim, if you're a peasant, the issue of partition and nationhood were distant issues from your daily life. And also, it is believed by some that he was supporting some anti-Hindu preaching that was going on at that time, anti-Hindu preaching that was feeding into that resentment against Hindu landlords. I do put a question mark next to that, however. So anyways, given the situation that I'm laying out here, I don't think it will be a surprise to you to find, if you didn't know already, that in 1907, there were riots that broke out, Hindu-Muslim riots that broke out in East Bengal. And the riots began in early March, they spread, they lasted into early May. And it probably won't surprise you either to learn that the Hindu account of how these riots began and the Muslim accounts of how the riots began are different. The Hindu account that you find in the Bengali is that when Salimullah Khan came to Kamala, that he ordered the looting of some Hindu shops. And the Muslim version that you find in the Englishman is that there were some Hindus who threw some stones at Salimullah as he was processing through the town, and that the rioting followed. So we've got different accounts here of what sparked it all, but my interest is not in the facts of the matter. My interest is in what was Aurobindo's reaction to the riots and his assessment. And he regarded Salimullah Khan as basically an instrument of the British fomenting Hindu-Muslim discord in order to block the Swadeshi movement and to block that movement towards independence. And he also talked about a hooligan element among the Muslims, and he referred to a low-class, uneducated element among the Muslims that Salimullah Khan was inflaming. And he essentially considered these riots to be a proxy war against the Indian nationalists waged by the British, somewhat of a proxy war. And he predicted that these riots would grow and spread across India, becoming an all-out war between the British and the Indians. And also at that time, he wrote many delusions, Writing on the Wall and Doctrine of Passive Resistance. These first two editorials are defending the use of violence against the British, and the Doctrine of Passive Resistance, often compared and contrasted with Mahatma Gandhi's approach to passive resistance, in which Aurobindo argued that when passive resistors are attacked, that they have every right to fight back, and in fact, that they have the duty to fight back. So anyways, I'm talking about Aurobindo's approach to Hindu-Muslim relations at this point in time. And I have said that I will talk about it in terms of ideals and realities. And we have the ideal here, but in terms of realities, the anti-partition movement, or what I will say here is that, the campaigning of Salimullah Khan had a receptive ground. Partition had its advantages for Muslims. There was resentment against Hindu landlords, and the Swadeshi movement had disadvantages for the peasantry, both Muslim and Hindu. And so what I want to bring up here is what one scholar has said. Instead of questioning his prescribed method, Aurobindo chose to treat intercommunity strife as an inconvenient distraction from the ultimate goal of nationhood. And another historian points out that even though the extremists had a formal policy of Muslim inclusion, that the extremists like Aurobindo and Bipin Chandra, they had no program of active outreach to include Muslims in the nationalist movement and to address Muslim concerns here. Anyways, that was 1907, and I'm going to move forward and talk about 1909. And 1909, Aurobindo was released from prison. He had spent a year in jail in conjunction with the Muzaffarpur bombing, and he was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. The judge ruled insufficient evidence. The Swadeshi movement was in abeyance at that time, and Bande Mataram in India was now defunct, and various extremist leaders had been imprisoned and were overseas, were out of the picture. And so Aurobindo found that, politically speaking, in terms of protest, the scene was very quiet when he was released from prison in early 1909. But his key activity at this time became founding these newer newspapers, Karma Yogan and Dharma. And in these, he tried to give a more, you could say, a more spiritual and cultural foundation to Indian nationalism. And it seems that he realized that the extremists had lacked a program of outreach to the Muslims and including them, and that was a weakness of the movement. And in his very first issue, Karma Yogan, he laid out an explicit policy of Muslim inclusion. He said, "We shall make it a main part of our work to place Muhammad and Islam in a new light before our readers, to spread juster views of Muslim history and civilization, to appreciate the Muslims' place in our national development, and the means of harmonizing his communal life with our own. And the Vedanta or Sufism, the temple or the mosque, whatever national asset we have, indigenous or acclimatized, the Karma Yogan will seek to make it known, to put in its right place and appreciate. So these are the ideals that Sri Aurobindo articulated in you could say July 1909 in Karma Yogan. But as I said, I'm discussing things in terms of ideals and realities. And in 1909, there were the famous Minto Morley reforms, and a long-standing goal of the Indian National Congress had been to increase Indian representation in the various governing councils. And the issue of having greater Indian representation and having an electoral process caused some concern among Muslims. Hindus are the majority in India. If there's an elected process, Muslim leaders were afraid that political concerns would get drowned out. And so there was the 1906 Simla deputation. And in that deputation, Lord Minto promised the Muslim leaders that if reforms were established and there were an electoral system, that there would be guaranteed Muslim representation. So there were the 1909 Minto Morley reforms, and Congress wasn't too happy about these reforms because even though they expanded Indian membership on the council, the reforms were set up in such a way that it did not give Indians any real power. And furthermore, the reforms were set up in such a way that the nationalist movement, whether the extremist variety or the moderate variety, was set up in such a way that the nationalist agenda wouldn't have much sway or influence or gain much ground. And also, some of the Congress members were embarrassed at the Muslim representation that was established, reserved seats for Muslims, and also a separate Muslim electorate. And in terms of reserved seats for Muslims and a separate Muslim electorate, what was Aurobindo's reaction to that? He said, "We will not for a moment accept separate electorates or separate representation, not because we are opposed to a large Muslim influence, but because we will be no party to a distinction which recognizes Hindu and Muslim as permanently separate political units and thus precludes the growth of a single and indivisible Indian nation." Very interesting to reflect on this in light of partition and later events and current history and so on. And also, he considered, earlier he had written in Vande Mataram, that any sort of separate electorate, he considered that as a new version of the classic policy of divide and rule in an attempt to divide Indians and to block any sort of push for political independence. So I'm talking about this in terms of ideals and realities, and I'm nearly at the end of my time here. So I'm just going to point out a few more things here. In spite of that reaction, first of all, in terms of ideals and realities, the historian Peter Hees points out here, the extremists like Aurobindo may have been right in arguing that reservations tended to divide the nascent nation, but they had no viable alternatives to offer. Aurobindo remained opposed to special concessions to Muslims, even when more practical politicians realized that they were necessary. Some positive political gesture was needed to demonstrate that the Hindu majority was not a homogenizing difference. So anyways, there were ideals and realities. And the last point that I'm going to make here was, even though he was upset by the Minto Morley reforms, he continued to insist to the end of that year and beyond that in a newly emerging nation, in a newly emerging a newly emerging Indian nation, that both Muslims and Hindus had their place, that both Hindus and Muslims had their place in a newly emerging India. And in terms of, was Aurobindo's contribution to the rise of political Hindutva second to none? Did he contribute at all to that? Well, I don't think a 20-minute presentation is going to solve that issue one way or the other, but I do hope that these 20 minutes have given some insight into the issues. So thank you, and with that, I end my presentation.
Thank you, thank you. So we still have another 2 minutes. If someone has questions, maybe we can allow one question here. If not, we will be invite our next presenter. Yes, and looks like we keep going on. I think. Yeah, we can start, I think, for the next, yeah.
Hello, I'm listed as the next presenter. My name's Adam Pave. I didn't want to interrupt. I don't know, am I to go, or are there questions for the previous presenter?
I think we are good. There's no questions in person, this room, and
Okay, well, someone in the chat said it was a very insightful presentation, so that's a good review so far.
Thank you.
My name's Adam Pave. I'm a professor at a junior college here in Southern California at San Bernardino Valley College. I teach in both philosophy and in religious studies. So a lot of people ask if the two disciplines are related, and I just need to point to the fact that they are, I believe. And outside of the United States, very often the two are seen in tandem. So rather than trying to show a PowerPoint presentation, I'm just going to talk. So my apologies that I may just appear to be a talking head on the screen. Hopefully it's not too big if you're in the room at Loyola Marymount there at LMU. Hopefully I'm not too big or scary on the screen. I'm just going to be talking a little bit about what I do in a particular course. I teach a course called Jesus and His Interpreters. And in this course, I do some different things than I think people are used to. So let me get on with my talk here. Some may see two clear connections within these fields of philosophy and religious studies, while others want to see them completely different and treat religion as something wholly separate, as if religion is as something can only be approached within a certain context, like a church or a mosque or an ashram or something like that. The academic study of religion, however, is something completely different. So part of this particular course that I want to discuss today, Jesus and His Interpreters, and part of all the courses in religious studies that I teach, is the discussion of the similarities and differences in the personal practice of religion and the academic study of religion. Now, this might seem like an odd way to begin and thinking, well, this is a really high-level academic conference, and we just heard a wonderful presentation on Aurobindo. I mean, my goodness, how am I going to compete with this? We all have our specialties, and we know so much about particular things. And here's this guy teaching at a community college at a very general, very introductory level. Well, my goal in teaching philosophy and religious studies to people who may not be exposed to this stuff, they may not know what it is. And if I say, well, we're going to talk about some highfalutin philosophical or religious ideas, and I start whipping out Sanskrit or even the 6 German words that I know, just kidding. Students, I may lose them, and they may say, what does this have to do with me? Well, I need to mention this because students generally think that a course called Jesus and His Interpreters is going to be something that's going to take place in a Christian church. Or it might be something, it is in fact like a Bible study where we're going to do something like prayer and opening song, and it's going to be a church service. And it is not. It is not that. While one of the required texts that students will actually be reading is the Christian Bible, that's not the case here. The course is not a Bible study. I go through that the first day, and occasionally I'll either have a student I wouldn't say walk out of the room within the first 5 minutes of the class, but perhaps not return after the first class. And then I need to email them and say, well, this is what the academic study of religion is. And generally they in fact return. First, however, I want to give you a brief outline of this course. I know that it sounds like I'm doing some background information here before I talk about actual Jesus in Hinduism, but I think that's important to do so that you can understand what it is that this course is about and what it is that I'm doing here. For the text, along with the Christian Bible, the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are required reading. There's also readings about non-canonical Gospels. We read from the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Thomas, and that blows some students' minds that there are actually more than 4 Gospels, more than 4 Christian Gospels out there. When I say there are dozens, if not hundreds, sometimes students are very confused by that, which is a good thing in academic learning. Let me tell you on that. All right, so the first book is Bart Ehrman, The Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium. I'm going to do this. I do this with my students, so my apologies. I like doing that on Zoom. It's kind of fun. But in that book, Ehrman's book introduces Jesus from primarily a historical perspective and focuses on Jewish and then, of course, Christian interpretations of Jesus over the past 2,000 years. However, I'm able to present through that book a kind of a world perspective of Jesus early in the course. And I think it's important for students to understand that the figure or person of Jesus has been discussed and interpreted by many people who belong to many different cultures, including Indian or Hindu culture, as we'll specifically see. The first half or so, just a little bit less than half of the course, is dedicated to Ehrman's text. Remember, this is an introductory level course, so it's important to review the Western or otherwise traditional interpretations of Jesus. And then I put in bold print here, I understand we might debate on what is traditional, but I don't want to digress too much, because whenever I say in an academic conference, well, there's a traditional reading of this, 60% of the room will raise their hand and say, no, this is the traditional reading. And it's completely different than what I've understood. So I can understand that. However, there is a Christian interpretation of Jesus, and I think it's important to start there because that's what students may be familiar with. So in that first part of the course, the students read Ehrman's text as well as the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then we move into non-canonical Gospels, particularly Thomas. I often include images of Jesus either in film or documentary. As well, for films, students are given options. We watch a popular film, something like Jesus Christ Superstar or The Passion of the Christ or The Last Temptation of Christ, something Hollywood has done to sort of give you this image. So in the last section of the course, which is about the last half, we shift to a broader perspective. As a side note, when I teach this section on Christianity, I heard a voice. Okay. When I teach the section on Christianity within my world religions course, and something that I thought to do here, but I realized that almost all the images I have are either copyrighted somewhere else, and I don't know if I feel comfortable sharing them, but I'll just mention some ideas that I show pictures of Jesus, actual images of the person of Jesus from different cultures, Chinese, Japanese, African cultures, Eastern Orthodox, Latin American cultures. So a lot of different cultures want to own Jesus. One of my favorites is the idea of Jesus' tomb in Japan, in Aomori. There's the beautiful street sign that says this way to Jesus' tomb, and he's buried there. So in many cultures, you see this ownership of Jesus, and I think it's fascinating. So this helps students understand that interpretations of Jesus exist outside of Western or worse, American worldview. So in using the text, Jesus Beyond Christianity, this is a wonderful text. It's Oxford University Press, Barker and Gregg. It's a reader, but it really opens a door, I think, for my undergraduate community college students. My goal is to provide students the opportunity to become aware of various interpretations, meanings of Jesus. A central question about Jesus is, who is he and why does he matter? So many of the students who come from either a Christian background or understand a Christian background will be able to answer that question. They'll answer from a Christian perspective. But does Jesus matter in Judaism, in Islam, in Hinduism, in Buddhism? And that's part of the funness, if that's a word, of this course. So I want to focus on the units on Hinduism. As with every unit for this particular course, Jesus and his interpreters, I provide students with goals in reading the particular chapters or the readings and then completing the work. So I'm going to read these goals so you can get a better sense of what I'm trying to do in this course, of my trajectory for this course. Then I will provide some more background and context for each one of these goals. So there's 5. And I try to do this in every course I teach. I like to give students, okay, at the end of this week or end of 2 weeks, here are the goals that we're going to have. And I started doing this when I started teaching at the community college, and it really kind of revolutionized my own teaching. And students really seem to appreciate it, so they have something to shoot for. So there's 5 goals. Number 1, understand the concept of the Asiatic Christ. Number 2, understand and explain the idea of the universal Jesus who spans beyond Christianity into other world religions. 3, understand and explain some of the Hindu reinterpretations of Christian understandings of Jesus. 4, understand and discuss the importance of Jesus' nature both as divine and human from within the Hindu perspective. Number 5, understand and discuss some of the differences that Hindus see between Jesus' teachings and the teachings of more organized and modern Christianity. So Asiatic Christ, universal Jesus, Hindu reinterpretations, Jesus' human and divine nature, and then 5th, which is really important, is the differences that Hindus see, some of the Hindu scholars we read, between Jesus' teachings and the teachings of Christians themselves. So separating Jesus from Christianity is that last one, which a lot of students seem to struggle with because they see Jesus as Christianity. They don't see the figure of Jesus. They see a religion in a person. And that's kind of tough to deal with. And many students I've had in this particular course say that the readings on Hinduism have helped them to see that Jesus as a figure rather than as a tradition. And it's sort of, even if they're not Hindus, and most of them are not, I'll be quite honest, they're not, it helps them with their own religious path. While that's not a goal of the course, it certainly is an interesting thing to hear. So next, I want to discuss these 5 key issues in some more detail. So first, this concept of the Asiatic Christ. It places Jesus not as a Western figure. Think about how Jesus is often portrayed in films, at least in the United States. He's a white dude with blonde hair, with blue eyes. Okay, he floats on water. He's a white dude. You know, that's all you see. You don't see anything else. Okay, but rather he's an Asiatic or Oriental figure, and the word Oriental a lot of times gets a bad rap. But in this case, the word Oriental just means non-Western. The term Occident refers to the West, and the Orient refers to the East. And so sometimes students like to hear about the Orient and the Occident, and this is a great teaching point that I've used in the classroom. So the Indian subcontinent is generally considered in the East, and then China, Korea, Japan, for example, in the Far East. Note, however, that some Hindu voices, for example, Vivekananda, upholds the idea that Hinduism is the mother of all religions. So we're off to an interesting start with my students who think that Christianity is the mother or father or end all of all religions. So now they hear Hinduism. So we bring the idea of teaching a world religions class into a course on Jesus and his interpreters. And I need to give some background. So I talk about Vivekananda's presence in the United States during the 1893 World Parliament of Religions. So 1893, the United States has the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. Vivekananda shows up. Wow, the United States is a little bit more open. I'm not sure all of the United States, but at least some part is. And it's a significant event where Hinduism becomes more recognized within the United States. With over 1 billion Hindus in the world, as I tell my students, this seems important as Hindu-Christian dialogue developed over the past 125 years or so. So we have that idea of the Asiatic Christ. Now let's move to inclusivity and exclusivity. Hindus often argue, we hear this as kind of a caricature, that Hindus argue against the idea of any kind of exclusivity with regards to religion, right? You accept everything. And they argue for a concept of the universal Jesus. So Jesus is often considered as an especially Christian figure, particularly by Christians. As we've already seen, other religious traditions, by this point in the course, we've talked about Judaism and Islam. So students have already seen a little bit. So as we've seen this, other traditions have incorporated Jesus into their traditions. Some Hindus argue against any kind of monopoly on spiritual truth. So there may be a truth that lays outside whatever we might think is traditionally, there's that word again, traditionally Hindu. And I talk in the classroom about how the word traditionally, we can't really use that outside of Christian teaching sometimes. So Hinduism focuses on what we might call philosophy. Here's where the course often takes a more introspective turn for students. Within Hinduism, there's often a focus on philosophical concepts when discussing many areas of interest, including the figure of Jesus. The text here, we read about Advaita, often known more formally as Advaita Vedanta, which is the philosophy of non-dualism. Teaching non-dualism in a class like this is something wonderful to do. I highly recommend teaching the concept of non-dualism to unsuspecting first-year college students who are unaware of what's about to hit them, by the way. That's a separate issue. To perhaps oversimplify it, I teach students that Advaita claims that all is not two. This is significantly different than all is one in a monistic belief system. Hindus generally acknowledge the diversity and plurality of the universe and often accept multiple gods, multiple realities, and even multiple truths. So within this plurality, there is unity, not sameness or oneness, but rather unity. So I give them some examples. For time, I won't go into too much detail, but they read from Ram Roy and Saraswati on the idea of divine oneness. And those passages often are discussed within our classroom. So divine and human nature, there is not agreement. Okay. There is not agreement within these views from Hindus on Jesus' human and or divine nature. Many Hindus hold, like much thinkers in other traditions, including Islam, that Jesus could not have been divine. We see this within some of the passages we read. There's absolutely no way. There's no way Jesus could have been divine, from the simple fact that Jesus did not approach that divine oneness that we just talked about. However, we have other thinkers, and I'm going to mention, of course, Mohandas Gandhi. I can't teach a course on Jesus and Hinduism without focusing on Gandhi. Well, Jesus may be divine there. And that's actually the question that students are posed within the classroom. And I'll get to that in just a minute, but I wanted to preview it there because it relates to that divine and human nature. Fifth, the final point is the distinction between Christianity and the organized Christian church. And there's a distinction for many of the Hindu thinkers from which we will read. As we'll see, many of the Hindu thinkers focus on an ethical interpretation of Jesus. that Jesus was a great ethical teacher. He was a moral man and just a human being. And there's no divine access point there. But however, some of the readings aim to show the distinction between Jesus' teachings and the teachings and practices of Christian churches. So they want to separate the man from the religion, the figure, I should say, because Jesus is much more than a man, even for many Hindu scholars. So Vivekananda, for example, argues that Christian missionaries have moved away from preaching about Christ's love and humility and are more concerned with condemning the actions of non-Christians as uncivilized. So this is something that many students kind of grab hold on, because missionaries often get a bad name, even within the personal practice of religion. Don't be a missionary and just condemn other people. If you're going to be a missionary, at least try to be a good one. So some of the passages are highly critical of the Christian church. Some also seem to promote Hindu-Christian dialogue, particularly around this figure of Jesus. So for many of the units in the course, students are required to write what I call a think piece. And this, I see I have just a minute or two left, so that's what I'm going to finish with. I'm going to finish with my students' voices rather than my own. So this is not a mini research paper. A think piece is an opportunity for students to actually say what they think and not just write a research paper. So for this particular question, here's what I asked students to do. Say, Gandhi speaks of the eternal truth behind all religious traditions. How does this affect his view of Christianity, and what place does Jesus have for Gandhi? And then I explain it just a little bit, give them an extra hint. Please note that you will need to understand what Gandhi means, but when he says eternal truth, and you will need to discuss Gandhi's thoughts on Jesus. After discussing Gandhi's ideas, please provide your own thoughts and interpretations on Gandhi's views. So I'm not asking students to tell me what they think about Jesus. I'm asking students to interpret Gandhi's views on Jesus and explain what he's trying to do. So I'll finish with one of my students here, or a few of my students, just some of the statements they've made. Community college students come up with the greatest things. When Gandhi speaks on the eternal truth behind all religious traditions, he's referring to the idea that they can all simultaneously be true at once, that no religion is the one right path because all religions are based on truths, although humans often err as to what these truths mean. There's another comment. This concept of the eternal truth behind all religious traditions affected Gandhi's view of Christianity and his relationship to Jesus through his understanding that while the teachings of Jesus were part of this truth, Christians have gotten his message wrong, claiming him for themselves and moving away from the ideas of loving one's neighbor and pursuing peace at all costs. One last one. For Gandhi, the teachings of Jesus were eternal because they needed to be practiced daily, consistently, to bring about a universal peace, not just for Christians, but for everyone. Gandhi doesn't need to believe in Jesus' divinity or be a Christian to follow his teachings of love and peace. So for a final project in this course, students must compare a non-Christian interpretation of Jesus with a Christian interpretation. In that comparison, they must include a discussion of Jesus' humanity and or divinity as it's interpreted or perhaps reinterpreted within the respective traditions. My goal in teaching this course is to broaden student awareness on the personhood or perhaps image of Jesus as he has been interpreted by various traditions spanning many traditions and time periods. So thank you for your time, and I will turn it back to our moderators or perhaps our next speaker.
So, here has questions.
So, Professor Pave, I'm a Master's of Yoga Studies. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's Pave, just like Pave the Road.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Don't try to make it fancy.
Sorry.
No
Thank you
problem.
so much. Thank you for teaching this course. And I just want to make a comment saying that this is a huge opportunity that you're presenting. There's a book called Jesus and the Lotus, the mystical doorway between Christianity and yogic spirituality, written by Russell Paul. And that book was life-changing for me because it enabled me to continue being a Catholic. I was brought up Catholic, but yet also be a yogi. So it at one point, you know, maybe 30 years ago, there was a strong distinction between you had to pick one. You couldn't be both a practicing Catholic and a yogi. So this book was very pivotal for me, and also considering the collective trauma in the world at the moment. I think it was Eric Fromm who wrote the book Art of Loving, who said that all mental illness is a separation from God. So bringing together the teachings of Jesus and the practice of yoga present a very powerful doorway for people to embody both these spiritual principles and a practice, a physical practice, or a practical way of living in the world. So I just want to share that with you. Thank you for putting those two things together. And I think, is Avi Dosh, Professor Avi Dosh, is he one of our people on Zoom? Yes or no? I'm thinking I see his name there. Maybe not.
Yes, Ted. You're mute.
Well, Adam, I just want to say I really enjoyed your presentation, and I resonated with what you said at the beginning. You know, I work in a department of theology, I teach Bible, and if I say to anyone I teach Bible, there's just a host of things that are projected onto me, and it just seems impossible for people to think of the Bible as a literary text, a history text, and so on. And just Friday, I was saying to my world religion students, we're going to look at the Bible right now, not as a document of divine revelation, but as a document of an ancient Middle Eastern tribal culture to gain insight into their life and society. And that's quite a mind shift for the students. So thank you.
Yes, in teaching Jesus beyond Christianity, that's actually the name of this book. Someone asked about the text. I'll type them in: Jesus Beyond Christianity, and then the second is Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium. That one, the Ehrman text, a lot of students take issue with it because it's not written by someone within a church from you know, who's trying to edify within the Christian faith. And to take the historical view, I think is very important. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to comment on the previous person. I apologize, I didn't catch your name about Jesus and the Lotus. And
Lisa. My name is Lisa.
Lisa, thank you, Lisa, for that comment. I love teaching, well, period, but I love teaching about how religion works and what people do when they do religion. And oftentimes I find students their minds get blown when they realize that you don't have to follow the rules necessarily that are given to you. Life comes with many different instruction manuals, and it's okay to not work with just one. There are many metaphors there, but that's one that I feel works with students, because they this appeal to authority, and they feel that they have to follow one particular authority, and anything that might contradict it, that might fall outside the lines. You know, something happens when we go from children to adults, and we have to follow certain rules. You know, my 8-year-old son is just fine with following his own rules and making up his own rules for games that he and his friends play. But when we get older, we have to follow the rules that are set for generations before us. And I find that fascinating. As we mature, we sort of let go of that curiosity, of that. And I'm not saying we should all become ignorant children or something like that. No, or become foolish. No, I mean, we can grow up, but we can still sort of engage the world and engage many different traditions. And I think in such a way that helps helps us grow. So I really appreciate your comment about Jesus in the Lotus, Lisa, and Ted. Yes, teaching teaching the Bible as literature has its own fascinations. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I saw some comments in the chat. Could you please write the name of the book that you mentioned in the beginning? Yeah, and now I will be invite our next presenter, Rohini. Is that right? Are you mute? So you use the two. Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm here.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you so much. So can you, I think, is the slide, is the screen okay for all of you, or is it still be watching the classroom on the big screen, or is it?
Yeah, it's okay. It's show your.
Okay. So my obeisance to all the enlightened beings, and I pay my reverence to my Guru, Acharya Mahashramaji, and I'm right now in Delhi and in the same location where Guru is also here. And I dedicate my research work on this topic of marriage, Puṇya in Jainism, and to Shashan Mata Sadhvi Pramukha Kanak Prabhaji, who is the head of Terapanthi, one of the prominent sect of Jainism. And she's undergoing a lot of troubles with her health, and I ask all of you to pray for her well-being, and I dedicate completely this research work for her well-being as a tribute for everything that she has done for our growth and development. So let me come to my topic. The topic is merit, that is Puṇya, revisiting. Offerings to Śvetāmbara Terapanthi Jain Ascetics in pandemic COVID-19. I would like to clarify that, well, Puṇya is one of the metaphysical concepts that has been admitted by Jain tradition, Jain faith, Jain philosophy, and Jain religion of all the sects who are following this practice and this concept. And it happened. I did not undertook purposely the ethnographic work, but it happened that I was traveling to a few places, and it's a kind of ethnographic research with which I have come up this idea to develop and to bring out the findings. As an insider and an outsider, I will try to be more generous in the way I could based on my perception in this fieldwork. So let me begin. The notion of merit, Puṇya, is one of the key concepts of ancient ontology, which are admitted to be 7 in Digambar tradition and 9 in Śvetāmbara tradition. And also in Śvetāmbara, somebody agree with both as the tattvas of Jainism listed as follow. Number first is Jiva, that is soul, Ajiva, non-soul, Puṇya, merit, Pāp, demerit, Ashram, influx, Samvar, inhibition, Nirjara, shedding off, Bandha, bondage, and Moksha, emancipation. So these are the 9 list of tattvas which has been admitted by all the traditions. Umaswati, the 4th century scholar and a monk, listed 7 reals in his more influential text, that is the Tattvartha Sutra, in which he excludes merit and demerit as independent universal principles. However, his Digambar commentator, Pujyapad, 6th century Common Era, explains merit and demerit to be implied in influx and bondage. So they are incorporating merit and demerit, Puṇya and Pāp, into the category of bondage rather than admitting to be the separate categories. I would like to quote Professor John Coate here, who suggests, if Puṇya, quote, if Puṇya and Pāp are considered only within the framework of bondage, that is bandha, then they are viewed in a wholly negative light. If they are considered as universal principles independent of their classification and bondage, then actions that is karmically binding yet morally valuable is not viewed so negatively. In other words, an ontology of just 7 tattvas accords value only to the moksha marga, that is the soteriological path, the goal of emancipation or liberation from the worldly, by eliminating all karmic bondage, whereas an ontology of 9 tattvas allows room for the positive valuation of action within the worldly by distinguishing among forms of karmic bondage and therefore accords some importance to the well-being, unquote. The 9 reals of Jainism, which were the principles of metaphysics, eventually were associated with epistemology, ethics, and soteriology over time. From the canonical periods onwards, reals, that is tattvas, became the content of three jewels, Ratnatraya, that is right worldview, Samyak Darshan, right knowledge, Samyak Jnana, and right conduct, that is Samyak Charitra, that constitutes, according to Jainism, the path of liberation. Of the 9 reals, in the current paper, I would like to discuss the notion of merit, Puṇya, in terms of offerings made to ascetics, as understood and needs to be revisited by the Śvetāmbara Terapanthi community in the present scenario of COVID-19 pandemic as an aspect of the right conduct. So it is important to begin to have a background knowledge of Jain Śvetāmbara Terapanthi sect and their understanding of merit. This tradition has largely emphasized, which started with Acharya Bhikshu, the first Acharya of this tradition of the 18th century. And this tradition has largely emphasized the notion of shedding off, that is nirjara, and inhibition somewhat, while merit, that is punya, simply negatively associated with shedding off in their emancipatory pursuits. Merit is viewed more as a karmic bondage. Further, the tradition admits that merit cannot be gained independently of shedding off in one's religious, dharmic pursuits. Both shedding off and merit are tied together, of which shedding off is desired and merit simply comes as its byproduct. They give analogy of growing grains for shedding off and the rise of grass that happens along with the grain for merit as its byproduct. As a side note, Acharya Bhikshu, unlike the co-production of shedding off and merit while making offerings to true ascetics, denied the co-production of shedding off and demerit based on the Bhagavati Sutra in feeding animals, non-ascetics, which includes the pseudo-ascetics according to his definition. He nevertheless strongly emphasized actions that are not directed for soteriology, yet can gain merit by the virtue of nirjara. Given this position, merit become one of the two types, one coming from the soteriological based actions, technically called as sakam nirjara, and the other from non-soteriology based actions, akam nirjara. Sakam nirjara and demerit is a straight impossibility for bhikshu as stated above. The unrestrained action of right worldview holder constitutes demerit as hurdles in the emancipatory goals. This historical background can help us to understand why merit was revisited by Acharya Bhikshu in his own version. The Terapanthi's notion of merit gained impetus in the early 18th century as a polemic against icon worshipper Jains, who admitted temple building as an act that yield merit for the lay people, and the iconoclast Sthanakvasis, who emphasized various projects of Panjarapo, like carrying animals, feeding lay followers coming from different towns and cities on their visits to ascetics as an action of daya, as acts of daya or compassion that brings merit for the lay followers. Acharya Bhikshu, however, vehemently opposed the mixing of emancipatory goals with the social well-being programs that involves violence. This is not to say that he was against social well-being, which was the wrong reading of other Jain sects of Acharya Bhikshu. What he emphasized was a right understanding and the radical practice of the path of Jain soteriology. For him, any violence involved in socio-emancipatory goals cannot constitute Jain soteriology. It is, however, beyond doubt that his orthodox lay followers who focus on the path of emancipation abstain until today from treating and feeding animals and birds. Furthermore, feeding family, relatives, and guests is taken by such followers from the soteriological or emancipatory goals perspective as a sin, which is nothing more than a social obligation, which is called as laukik kartavya. The contemporary Terapanthis who strive for emancipatory goals quote the famous work of Acharya Tulsi, the ninth Acharya, Puṇya bandha dharmika karmishu keval punya swatantra nahi, which explains that merit is not independent of shedding off. In fact, it is the byproduct of shedding off. Thus, of the 12 categories of shedding off, merit accompanies all those activities such as fasting, studying, meditation, religious text reading, discussion, and others. Further, merit is independently categorized into 9 types, all associated with ascetics, one of the 12 vows of a lay followers. When studied in context of its soteriology as elaborated by Bhikshu, merit can also manifest for a lay follower when food and other necessities are given to a true ascetic. This is one of the merit-making contexts for a lay follower and is strongly emphasized by the ascetics in their preachings through ancient narratives. It is in fact this merit of the lay followers that sustains the entire ascetic community. A true ascetic is one who undertakes the practice of major vows, mahavratas, without limitation. To follow the vow of ahimsa and other, an ascetic renounces farming, cooking, buying, shopping, and many other activities on which one can live on a daily basis, such as food, clothing, shelter, which is again not prepared for them. The three forms of violence, doing, getting done from others, and approving such violence are abstained by a true ascetic. To such a strongly committed group of ascetic, the lay followers extend their support. Ascetic and lay mutually benefit each other in the ritual of food collection and offering. In this mutual exchange program of food collecting and offering, the former practices ahimsa and the latter gains merit through nirjara, that is through shedding off. In doing so, the lay followers to pave the path of emancipation through shubha yoga, that is right action. It is right action for a lay follower when they support a true ascetic. In other words, a right action of a lay in context of offering is dependent on a true ascetic. Ascetic are people committed to Jain path of purification. They, however, like other human beings, go through problems of sickness and other natural evils, such was the case in pandemic, in the pandemic context. In such situations, the commitment to their practice of collecting alms can be observed or was observed only with a few kind of limitations. Thus, in a wider situational frame, ascetics can be categorized, even in the Terapanthi lay community, into three sections. Number one, ascetic practicing vows without breach, offering made to them by the lay community brings merit along with shedding off. Second, ascetic practicing vows with limitation because of health issues. Offerings made to such ascetic cannot yield shedding off and therefore no merit. It's a kind of a social support for those ascetics. As there is a burden of violence on ascetics, they do prayashchitta, which while taking food with limitation from the lay followers. Lay followers are, however, not advised particularly any ritual such as doing prayashchit while making social support to such ascetics, which they otherwise would not do for animals or non-ascetic group to gain emancipatory credentials. So this was the second category. The third category is ascetic vow of collecting alms in COVID-19 pandemic, which was a kind of natural issue without bringing the political part or other aspects, has been adversely impacted for offerings cannot yield shedding off, thus no merit for the lay community. In other words, such offering produces, in terms of Acharya Bhikshu, demerit. So the question is, the challenge is, what will be the status of emancipatory merit for lay persons in all the above stated situations while making offerings to above stated three sets of ascetics? According to Acharya Bhikshu, the founding Acharya of this sect, he made two kind of division basically of compassion, like Lokik Daya, that is social support made for the social well-being, and which in terms of emancipatory goals, when you make such support and that consists, that which involves violence straightforwardly brings demerit. And the next one is the Lokuttar Daya, which is a clearly kind of devotion in which there is no any kind of engagement of violence. And such Daya is called as Lokuttar Daya, which is purely committed for the liberatory or emancipatory purposes. So what will be the third category? The third category in the situation of pandemic, when there is an offering made with a limitation to such ascetics. In this 21st century, how will we evaluate this merit or this ritual of offerings? I would like to suggest, rather than straightforwardly putting into the category of Lokik Daya, I would try to introduce I would try to kind of bring the notion of Sanghiya Daya, that is institutional compassion. So people of the community being connected with an institution, support the institutional members, and with that faith, they try to offer food to the monks or to the ascetics. So given the above stated analysis of the act of offerings and the respective consequences it produces in soteriological terms, it seems that only physically and psychologically unchallenged individuals committed for asceticism and practicing it without limitation can help lay followers in reaping or in making merit. The power dynamics existing currently in the Terapanthi community at the ascetic and lay level, however, based on my ethnographic research, I would like to say that induces hegemony producing systemic violence. In the name of services to the ascetics, the ordinary lay followers sometimes are forced by the alienate members of the community to show for making offerings and the benefits while making community arrangement in situations such as pandemic are enjoyed by the alienate and people associated with those groups. So pandemic beyond soteriology has revealed a kind of, I would suggest, a systemic violence inherently present in an organizational setup. In a pandemic situation such as COVID-19, the interaction with the society has been severely impaired. Further, there are little chances for ascetics to follow the rules of alms collection without limitation, as was stated pre-pandemic situation. Thus, no scope for the lay followers to make straight merit through their offerings from the lens of emancipatory goals. The question then is how ascetic lay mutual relationship can be established in the ritual of food offering, collecting in a pandemic situation that can support Jain soteriology as viewed by the founding member of the Terapanthi Acharya. A scholarly rightly asked the 10th Acharya of Terapanthi order, His Holiness Acharya Shri Mahapragyaji, that how can food prepared with violence produce merit for lay followers who supports pure ascetics following the norm of collecting alms without limitation, because for the purity of means to solve the purity of end aspect is violated irrespective of pandemic situation. Given the analysis of the status of ascetic and the offering made to them in an exceptional social setting such as pandemic, lay followers with their cultural memory support ascetics with hierarchical order present in Terapanthi organization present. Given this scenario, the urgency is of just treatment, equitable benefits, and inclusive window for both ascetics and lay followers who are off the dice. Unfair behavior is a sin, and therefore the focus should be on fairness in offerings rather than offerings made by selected lay community who control the major community resources. The ascetics, however, showcase themselves as radicals and are taken as elevated beings by being more conservative and rigorous in their ascetic practices, especially food collection, which in the pandemic and post-pandemic scenario has receded them as ascetics with limitations. Interestingly, I would suggest that food and other arrangements made by the lay followers for their ascetics can be considered as an institutional compassion, and I would abstain from putting it into either Lokik or the Lokotar Daya as explained or brought by Acharya Bhikshu, as interpreted by Acharya Bhikshu. Thus, in the concluding part, I would like to say that minimum violence is unavoidable for both ascetic and lay followers alike. The differences are definitely based on the lifestyles that ascetics rigorously follow in the lay community with their own comfortability. In the pandemic scenario, ascetic-lay relationship is clearly severed and was serving Jain soteriology as admitted by Acharya Bhikshu in the ritual of food collection and offerings. If it cannot serve soteriology, then on what grounds will lay community extend their services to the ascetics? As I have already suggested on the basis of institutional compassion, how will merit for the lay be reestablished in their practice of offering in a COVID-19 pandemic and post-pandemic situation? Here are my concluding some suggestions in regard to the merit. So merit must be revisited in terms of fair treatment towards all the renouncers, irrespective of what designations or on what hierarchical positions they are. In the current pandemic situation, the question of merit and soteriology in context of offering meats to lay followers made by the lay followers, must be observed by cultivating the dignity towards all renouncers in their own rights, irrespective of who they are. Thus, true renouncers are those who do not allow, who do not all allows their followers to observe discriminatory roles. Offerings made cautiously, being respectful towards natural resources and the entire community member, inclusive of who they are, whether they are like on an elite level or they are working at a grassroots level, whatever is their status. To such ascetics, irrespective of who they are, can constitute right space for merit and soteriology for the lay followers. This was my whole idea about merit revisited based on my study and the text that I have undertaken. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks for this opportunity, because I was in South Asian Studies Association in 2019 as well, presenting in person my paper in McKenna College at Los Angeles. And I am privileged to be again, to be the part of this wonderful conference among all this scholarly galaxy of scholars. Thank you for this opportunity, and I open if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. And does anyone have comments or questions?
I do have a question.
Of course.
Can she hear me?
Yeah, let's see. You look a little bit small, I think. Go ahead. Yeah.
Namaskar, thank you so much, Samani. This was very interesting, but unfortunately, I couldn't hear everything. I'm very interested in the topic because I've been reading a lot lately about Dana in Jainism. And I was wondering if you could share the paper with us. Is there a way I can read what you were saying?
Perfect. I would definitely do that.
So how can I email you, or how can I reach you?
Let me make a kind of little bit of editing, and then I can send you through an email. If I probably have, you can send me your email address, something like that, and I can definitely share. You can even comment for further improvement if you have any questions. Something.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I don't know your email.
I can share it.
Right
now I'm sending the email.
Okay.
I can share the email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I will send you an email because so we can include her notes in. We've been doing some work on that. Thank you so much.
Here is my email. I have already sent on the chat box. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
it.
Anyone else have the comments and the questions? No?
Thank you.
Okay, if no questions or comments, and we will be back at 9:35. And we
I have some questions for Ted, if I can, about Aurobindo. I see we have time, and I hate to waste the time.
Yeah, it's until 25. Yeah.
In some of the passages that I teach about from Aurobindo, it's primarily, obviously it has to do with Jesus and what he's saying, but some of the things that you said about carrying out his political agenda in India, I wondered if you thought his methods were, I don't know how to phrase this the right way without sounding silly or I don't know, flippant or something, but are they more religiously motivated or are they more politically motivated? I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. If that question even makes sense or is fair. Is it a fair question?
Oh, you raised exactly the issue. I mean, what you just articulated, that is exactly the issue. And there's just a whole host of different perspectives on that. And, you know, his father was an atheist. Aurobindo says that most of his childhood, he was an agnostic. And, he gradually, goes into this role of becoming a spiritual master. And, the political falls by the wayside. Not that he doesn't care anymore, but in terms of his involvement, it falls by the wayside. There's these spiritual concerns that take off. And so where's the turning point, and what? And is he being insincere in his political days about religion, or is he being sincere? And, what I would say is that, he, as I said, the most recent biography is not the life of Sri Aurobindo, but the lives of Sri Aurobindo. So many different phases. And I would say that, at least in the beginning, it seems to me that in the beginning of his involvement in the Swadeshi movement, he's using religion to support the politics. His real interest is nationalism, and he's a cultural nationalist, so he's drawing on his Hindu heritage. And he admits later on that he didn't necessarily accept or believe in all of that heritage, but he as a cultural nationalist is drawing upon it. But then as he gets more involved, there are religious convictions that take root. And, what's the turning point? When does his convictions become sincere? I would say, probably 1907, 1905, I would say that, he's articulating certain religious convictions. So I would, maybe 1905 is a turning point. But, that whole interplay between religion and politics, especially in those early years, that's just an ongoing debate in Aurobindo scholarship.
Thanks. I appreciate that, because in reading one of the passages that I have my students read, it's the title of the passage, they say, an avatar of sorrow, and it's about how Jesus is an avatar, and it mentions sort of comparing Jesus to ideas within the Bhagavad Gita. And in reading this, I see more of a, I don't want to say political leaning, but more of a poetic. I was reading it, and it felt like a wonderful poem without any religious conviction. And it sounded funny to me to say that, but I saw this sort of focus on unity on a communal level more than on a spiritual level. And
Okay.
I wondered if you felt that, and it seems like I don't know, you framed it very nicely. I appreciate your comments.
Okay, well, I'll say two things in that regard is, I know what you're talking about, because, he is an artist, he's a poet, and really that's if, in terms of continuity through his life, the commitment to poetry, that's the enduring continuity from his earliest years to his final years. And yeah, sometimes in his early poetry, when he's first in India, he's relying on, portraying Hindu religious themes, but doing it as a poet, as an artist, not necessarily as a believer. So that resonates with what you're saying. The other thing that I'll say, though, in that regard is, in terms of Aurobindo discussing Jesus, I myself only remember one place where he does that, and that's in his essays on the Gita. So the particular source that you're talking about, I'm not sure that I'm familiar with that. So yeah, what I've said is probably all I can say at the moment in that regard.
Yeah, I have a couple sources on it. The one was within Essays on the Gita and Savitri.
Oh, okay, all right.
You mentioned, and then the other is Essays Divine and Human.
Okay.
And what he says there, just very briefly, it's very straightforward. But the kingdom that came was not Christ's; it was Constantine's. And he's one of the thinkers who's separating, Jesus, the figure of Jesus, and the ethical teachings, if you will, even the avatar from Christianity, this thing that is forced upon Indians, upon Hindus, this thing that has sort of ransacked faith, if you will. So he's really separating that. One of the other passages, and it's not Aurobindo, but I just really have to mention it because it was so so fun. Students really, it's Keshav Chandra Sen, repudiate the little Christ. And they read that one first, but when you read Aurobindo, it's sort of like taking Aurobindo and amplifying it, you know, this idea of repudiating this little Christ, this thing that people have made Christianity into. But in any case, I appreciate your comments on Aurobindo's sort of political, poetic leadings at times. I think he's an artist more than anything else at times.
Sure. Well, now that you mentioned some sources, I mean, what I can add to what you said just briefly here is that, you know, he believed in kind of a very ancient, universal, primordial spirituality. And I don't think he really likes Christianity much, and for understandable reasons. It's associated in his mind with difficult childhood experiences and empire and all that. But, you know, I think he regards Jesus in terms of that primordial spirituality and regards medieval religion as a departure from that primordial spirituality.
Can I go?
Exactly on that. I think I see other questions.
I have a kind of a question for Professor Adu. Can I go ahead? So the entire kind of world religious courses, introductory courses, the way the academic platform brings for the students, in which religions are introduced as, in a way, try to introduce in a form of historical text or person as a historical being. So when the entire approach in such courses is to be more inclusive, how can the faith-based religion itself can be an inclusive part of such teachings? I myself struggle with how to do with this, incorporating the faith element as an inclusive part of teaching religion, like the aspect of unquestioning God part, which is a kind of faith, straight faith. How can that become a part of academic inclusiveness?
Thanks for the question. I think one of the things that I do early on in the course is to separate, or at least distinguish, the personal practice of religion and the academic study of religion. And we can do both at the same time, sort of. And I say sort of very, very, because I think students tend to think that when they see a religion course, we're going to study how to do a religion better. And the academic study of religion is learning what people do when they do religion. So you might be learning about yourself. You might be learning about other people. But the goal in the academic study of religion is not to learn about religion, to do it better, to become a better Christian, to become a better particular form of Hindu, to become a particular form of something. That's not the goal. If it happens, that's okay. That's not, I mean, there's always, when you learn how to juggle, for example, you learn balance, but the goal, you know, sometimes there's a different goal in mind. 2 minutes left. But in this particular case, I think that we need to really separate the personal practice and the academic study of religion. Now, I will say this. I've had in my graduate school, I mean, it was a long time ago, but I've had faculty along the way who have said, you need to leave your beliefs at the door, or you can only study this stuff if you don't believe in any of it. Or in order to learn this, you have to believe it. I'm a little skeptical of all of these kind of comments, because what I tell my students is, if you leave your beliefs at the door, then you're not coming in the room, because your beliefs are part of who you are. Now, so you bring them with you, but understand that the person sitting next to you may not be the same way. So we need to respect each other, but we need to be open. And I think that there's sort of a balance there. between respect and understanding and belief. I don't need to believe something in the way of following, practicing a particular tradition to respect it and to understand what it means. I think there's a balance there somewhere. So I really appreciate that comment though, because for the person who is a faith-based believer, they believe wholeheartedly in something and they enter into a room and say, wait, you mean you're telling me this is wrong? That can be jarring. But I think education is jarring at times.
Well, it could also be when we are lot of emphasizing on inclusiveness, including various disciplines, history, literary, and other aspects along with religious teaching. I just was wondering how can, rather than asking them to believe, come believe with open mind.
Sure.
How would that go?
Sure. One of the examples I use, and I know we're out of time, but one of the examples I use is I really enjoy teaching about religions of Hawaii, about Hawaiian traditions, and I talk about Pele, the volcano. She's a volcano. She's a goddess. She lives under a volcano, and when the volcano erupts, I say, what happened? So there's someone who believes, someone said it's true that Pele is angry, and then a volcanologist will say it's true that all these rock formations happened and the volcano erupted because of heat, because of magma, and so on, because of geological formations. So you have two explanations. Well, what happened at the end of the day? And students, well, the volcano erupted. Exactly. That's true. So, and when we say, what is truth? Is it true that Pele exists? Say, well, it's true that these people believe that Pele exists. Well, is it true that Pele exists? Does it matter? These people believe it is true. So when we talk about truth, I think it's not true. It's not true for me that Pele exists. Well, it better be true for you that these people believe. Because if you're telling me you don't believe that these people believe, then you're calling them liars. That's just wrong. So you need to say it is true that there are believers, and that is truth. So when we talk about inclusivity, that's the direction I go. I don't know if that helps or not.
Not sure. For some, maybe it works very well and differs based on what people want to understand and what they want to learn.
I appreciated your presentation. I had questions about Jainism. I'm not going to ask all of these questions about Jain asceticism, but I appreciate your.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody being here, and we got the extras conversation here. We're so lucky. And then we'll be back at 9:35, and it's our season 4. So hope to see you there, and I will playing some like Indian music. Hope everyone enjoy. See you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Should I get started?
You can
Set
add
up.
35. Yeah, set up if you want to share with your
You want me to, you have a MacBook, dude. What's better, what do you think? My computer?
If you want to use your computer, you just like join the Zoom and share your screen and then it will work.
And like, it'll just share my PowerPoint presentation? Okay, let's do this.
Yeah. Or you have a drive, you just
Oh, the drive?
yeah. You just share it.
If I use it off my computer, then I know that formatting won't be all messed up, you know? There's two more, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So did you check the room? They didn't do it right.
Oh, okay, what happened?
They just didn't put the stage in.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah,
We'll have some
okay.
chairs for Rajiv. I think that'll be fine.
Okay, good, good.
How are you doing?
Good, good. Ooh, I like the music. Yeah, I'll have to do photos later because exclusive.
Do I actually have to join the network? Could you, could you help me just kind of set up the thing? Thank you, appreciate it. So, I'll be very fast. Oh, good, thank you. That's great. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I have it.
You have the email I sent you?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure, just a second.
Oh, no, okay, we'll get someone to do it right. Yeah.
Is anyone there? Up there? There's no sound.
Yes, thank you. We know we be prepared.
That's my friend.
Okay. Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Oh,
All right, we are ready.
Yes.
So, quick question. Where should I stand?
Yeah, so they can
And
see
you-
you.
you can
You can
see
see
you're
yourself in the mirror. So to
Okay.
speak. Yeah.
Sounds good. And
And start. And you can introduce yourself.
all right. Oh,
Now let's invite our first presenter, Neel.
hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation today. It's great to see some familiar faces here in person and online. So thank you for being here. I want to start my presentation today on leveraging digital archives for South Asian studies research. My name is Neel Agrawal, and I'm the digital projects librarian here at Loyola Marymount University. I've been here for about 4 months, and it's been such a great experience. And it's been great to present here and to be part of actually this 15th annual conference of the South Asian Studies Association at LMU. So today, I hope you come away with a greater understanding of some digital tools and resources that can help empower your research on South Asian studies. Okay, so let's start with a presentation overview. So I'm going to start out with providing a brief introduction to my work in archives. And then I really want to focus today on some starting points for your research and to think about your research framework to really help find the sources that you need. We'll be looking at research guides, indexes, and catalogs. And we'll also be discussing ways that you can search and browse through digital collections. Then I want to point you to some digital archives, so that you can find some subject-based content and some geographic-based content as well. And we'll also conclude the discussion with some information on digital preservation of cultural heritage. And finally, it might be cut off on the bottom there, but you can see there'll be 5 minutes for questions and answers. All right. I bring a lot of archival experience to my work here at LMU. I'm currently the digital projects librarian here, and I coordinate and manage our digital collections. Previously, I launched the South Asia Open Archives. That's a free resource containing almost 1 million pages of content, and it's hosted on JSTOR. It's open access. I also served as the global law librarian at LA County Law Library, where I managed the foreign and international law collections. I had a fellowship at Harvard, and I'm currently a faculty member at eLaboratories, which is a digital editing project at University of Virginia. And again, I apologize for some of the information being cut off here at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so I also bring my social justice background to my work. And I think that's really important here when we're democratizing information and making diverse sources available to a lot of different people around the world. I have a lot of human and civil rights experience. And I also have participated in a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access initiatives. Particularly, I want you to just highlight the IHIP initiative, which is the Inclusive History and Images project here at LMU that recently launched to tell a much more equitable story of LMU's history. Okay, so let's get into the presentation here a bit. So you might be interested in learning more about where to start your research. There's so many different research topics in South Asian studies. And so first, you might want to define what your research topic is. So for example, it could be caste-based discrimination, which is such an important topic. And so you might have a narrow topic or you might have a broad topic. So let's say you're using caste-based discrimination as your topic here. Where would be good places to start your research? So we'll look at research guides today, some indexes and some catalogs for a variety of subjects. And then you want to think about what are your search terms to find these materials. So if you're looking for materials on caste-based discrimination, you might want to have terms like Dalit and inequality, but there's certainly other terms that you could use. And then always think about whether you're looking for primary sources or for secondary sources. So primary sources are the original documents themselves, and secondary sources are materials that point you to those documents and also help interpret the original sources. Okay, so one great place to start is the Library of Congress. They have a great collection of South Asian materials. This is a research guide on the South Asian collection at the Library of Congress. This provides an overview of materials that you could find on site at the Library of Congress. But I want to point you to the left side of the screen there to those links, and particularly to the digital collections link, the web archives, and electronic resources. So those are great ways to find free online material on South Asia. So let's say we were to click on the digital collections link there, and it'll take you to a research guide on digital collections. And if you scroll down on that guide, on the right side of the screen there, I included a screenshot. That provides free sources that are hosted on the Internet Archive from the Library of Congress. And if you scroll down a little bit more there on the right side, you'll see that there's the South Asian Literary Recordings Project. So I want to click on that because I think it's a really cool and interesting project that's spearheaded by the Library of Congress New Delhi office. So this is a great place to find recordings of authors in a variety of languages. So these are generally readings of, these are recordings of readings of poets, authors, and playwrights. So you can click on any of the languages there. I highlighted the Nepali authors and Sinhalese authors there. And so there's some really great content on this website. Okay, let's look at another guide from the Library of Congress. This is the South Asian Studies e-resources. This provides some really great sources on the web that you can consult. So let's take, for example, let's say you're looking for some information on the 1947 partition. You could start here as a great starting point to find some material on the partition. There's a lot of different sources here. You see there's the 1947 Partition Archive, but there's other items here that could be helpful for your research. There's the digital dictionaries of South Asia, there's digital Himalaya, but again, we're looking at partition sources. So let's say that you were to click on the 1947 Partition Archive, and that'll take you to their homepage. This is a really great collaborative project that documents partition stories. And I believe there are over 10,000 stories in this collection here. And there's a really, really useful map on the homepage here. So you can zoom in on that map to find a particular story. So they're based on location. So if you were to zoom in and click on a particular story, this is an example. So this is a story of somebody who originated from Lahore, Pakistan. And so if you were to click on that particular story, that map point, it actually provides their background information, some information on their partition story, and then actually their migration route as well. I really encourage you to take a look at this resource. It's really a great place for partition research. Okay, another great place to start our research guides would be to consult the research guide published by university. Several universities have South Asian experts working in their libraries. So this is a great resource published by NYU's library and created by my colleague and mentor, Aruna Magar at NYU. So this is a research guide to help, for starting points in a variety of different areas. So on the left side of the screen there, you can see there's some guides pertaining to South Asian history primary sources, South Asian literature, materials on gender and sexuality, data and maps. If you were to scroll down, you would see that there's materials also on legal resources and a variety of other subjects. So let's say we're looking for some colonial era documents, some primary sources from the colonial era. You could click on the left side of the screen, you could click on South Asian history primary sources. And it takes you to a really, really great list of primary sources there. You could click on Digital Colonial Documents, India, which is a really great project that promotes the study of rare seminal documents, which were critical and influential to the formation of India as a nation and state. And so you can see there's a great listing of sources here. There's census material from the 1800s and early 1900s, but there's also some guides to the various presidencies. So like the Madras presidency and the Bombay presidency. So I encourage you to take a look at some of these links. These are fully searchable items here that have been made available through the Digital Colonial Documents Project. Okay, let's keep moving on. Here's another great source called The Ideas of India. So this is created by Rahul Sagar. This is like an index of periodicals from pre-partition. And so you could actually get a full listing of periodicals here. So there's some great magazines, journals, and it provides the thumbnails here of the actual front pages of these journals, and also indexes them so you know which years they were published and which issues they have. So another great source for starting your research. Okay, I want to take you to another source here. Let's say you're interested in looking for South Asian maps. You could consult Francis Pritchett's website. Francis Pritchett is a professor emerita at Columbia University, and there's this great website here that Francis has published containing links to maps, South Asian literature, and even materials on Dr. Ambedkar. So because we're interested in looking for maps right now, you could click on maps of South Asia, and it gives you some links here to maps organized by certain periods. So we have early maps, medieval maps, Mughal maps, colonial maps, modern maps, and overview maps. Let's say we're interested in looking for colonial maps. So we would click on that. And particularly, we could be interested in looking for maps from South India and Sri Lanka. So this contains maps from the 1830s and the maps and maps from the late 1800s. So let's click on the map one here from India and Sri Lanka, India and Ceylon, and it'll take you to a digitized version of that map. And there's hundreds of maps available through this website. So again, I really encourage you to take a look at this website here. Okay, another great place to start your research is to look through digital collections at various universities. So this is the University of Minnesota digital collections. Universities have digitized content themselves and have hosted that content and made them freely available. So they're great places to start your research by searching through their catalogs. I know there's a lot of art historians at this conference. So let's say you're looking for an item on Indian art, like a journal. You could do a search for journal Indian art in the Minnesota catalog. And it'll provide several search results. One that's really interesting here is the Journal of Indian Art. I think there's 17 volumes available through University of Minnesota, and these are freely available for anybody. But I also want to point you on the right side of the screen to the metadata. This is really useful for your research, and particularly if you're looking for additional items related to Indian art, you could look under the subject section here and click on that and find similar items like that are similar to the Journal of Indian Art. Okay, now let's take a look at a few different digital libraries that are spearheaded in South Asia. So this is the National Digital Library of India, which is an initiative through the Government of India Ministry of Education. This is a really comprehensive library, a digital library, and it contains journal articles, newspaper articles, recordings, theses, textbooks. So you could do a search. And so let's take an example that we talked about earlier on caste-based discrimination. So I did a search for caste discrimination, and it actually provided quite a few search results, too many actually. And so you can limit your searches on the left side of the screen through subject category. So I limited it to literature and rhetoric, and it provides some really great newspaper articles here from the Hindu. Next, I want to highlight a project called Touchability. So this is a great resource of South Asian popular visual culture. So it's a really, really great project. And particularly, you can search and browse through these collections. I do want to point you to the visual essays and gallery section on the left-hand side there. And so that provides images and provides some context about those images. So you could click on that link there to find some visual essays. One that I thought was really interesting is this ephemera project. So let's say you're interested in South Asian ephemera. There's this visual essay called A Little Box of Lights. So this is a Delhi-based architect who was an avid collector of South Asian ephemera. And so there's a lot of matchboxes that you could access here. I clicked on the musical instruments, the matchboxes containing musical instruments. And on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there's some matchboxes with tabla. Below that, there's actually a violin and several other instruments. So for those of you who are interested in ephemera, I think this is a great website to consult. Another source that is really popular is Rekhta, available at rekhta.org. This is a great source for Urdu poetry. And so I would encourage you to browse through the collections. So in the upper left-hand corner, if you were to click on poets, it gives you browsing collections there containing Urdu poetry by poet or by subject. And so this is just a really, really interesting place to browse through, particularly if you're interested in Urdu poetry. Now I want to give you a few resources on the South Asian diaspora. So this is the South Asian American Digital Archive, which is based out of Philadelphia. And I've had the privilege to present with them and to work and collaborate with them. So it's a great resource highlighting underrepresented stories from the South Asian diaspora in the US. There's also the Pioneering Punjabis Digital Archive, which documents the Punjabi farmers in Northern California. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'm just gonna briefly share a project that's in development called the Bhakti Virtual Archive, or PAVA. And this is a project that makes Bhakti scholarship freely available, and it's in development, but I'm really excited for it to launch in the future. And very briefly, I just want to discuss some considerations for digital preservation, because I've done a lot of digital preservation projects. So and they're fraught with various considerations. So one thing you might want to think about is selection and prioritization of materials. How are you going to select materials for preservation? What's your criteria? What formats are you digitizing? Are they print materials or microfilm materials? Because they both come with their own considerations. What are your scanning specifications? What resolution are you scanning to? What compression levels are you using? These are all the different details that we think about when preserving material. And of course, how are you going to store these materials for the long term? I've used Amazon Web Services for storage, but there's several options for long-term storage and preservation of your material. And then file naming. I know that might seem mundane, but when you're dealing with thousands or perhaps even hundreds of thousands or millions of images, it's important to come up with consistent file naming conventions to locate your materials and to perhaps even do migrations in the future. And then, of course, lastly, funding is really important because these projects require a lot of funding to preserve our cultural heritage, to catalog them and make them available. So to think about what kind of sort of grant funding you might have access to, or what sort of collaborative initiatives you might spearhead in order to fund these projects. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending the presentation today. I'm glad to answer your questions. I think we have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions and answers. So thanks once again, and thanks to everyone here at LMU for coordinating and managing this conference.
Yeah, so the chat, so it's possible to share your PowerPoint with everyone, or if not, and we will be up this video through our YouTube channel, and then you can still to review
Sure.
the YouTube channel. So
We can do both.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
happy to share the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question?
Yes.
If you could explain the work that you created, is this the result of your work was aggregating, or when you were working on that project in Chicago, what was the nature of it?
Sure. So Professor Chris Chappell was asking about the South Asia Open Archives project that I launched. That was a 5-year undertaking. I was there for 5 years, and obviously it's still available. So in that project, we digitized materials from the 1800s and early 1900s mostly. And that was a consortium of over 25 research libraries from the US and from around the world. And so I was managing and coordinating that network of libraries, which were dedicated to curating the sources. We were a curated collection focusing on, women and gender, political sources, literature. And so there was a lot of curation involved and decisions around that. And then, of course, I managed the workflows for digitizing those materials. So in my 5 years, we digitized 1 million pages of South Asian sources, and we made them openly accessible as well. And so there was a lot of that workflow management as well. And and then we hosted the materials on JSTOR, and we were the first project to prototype their open access platform called JSTOR Forum.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question here.
Oh, about what proportion of the material has to be translated or is not in English that comes from South Asia, and how does that get addressed as to how people are going to view it?
Sure, and yeah, great to see you, Ajit, from Lansing, Michigan, my home. There's a lot of materials in the native languages, and so there are some translation projects, but really our goal has been to digitize the sources and to make them accessible. And there's also to make them searchable. They have to be OCR'd. So that's a whole nother process as well. So of course, the OCRing of English language materials is a lot more accurate than South Asian languages. So yeah, I think translating the materials would be a whole nother step. And I think there's some initiatives for that, but really the primary work is about digitizing and making them available and accessible through metadata.
Yeah, I really appreciate this, and it's one of the greatest things is collation of resources because the internet's so vast. And I've been recently thinking about this with visual materials, and it seems like you have to go museum to museum to look for different things. Is there any project to try to, like you did at Chicago, to bring museums together and have one database you can find, like you were looking for, for my, it's like a Mysore Devi Mahatmya, because its folios are all over the place, to be able to actually build a network of those. Is there anything like that going on that you know of?
Well, that's what we were trying to do at South Asia Open Archives, not only digitize materials and make them presentable, but also to bring together sources digitized and hosted elsewhere. So we call that federated discovery. And so we were a federated platform where we would link out to resources hosted elsewhere rather than ingest those sources ourselves. We would point to them, but we would also digitize materials and host them. So that's one project. I'd also encourage you to look at Hathi Trust, which is sort of a federated repository as well. But it's tough. This is like a piecemeal environment, and we're trying to bring sources together, but it's tough. There's a lot of different initiatives out there with different priorities.
And another resource that people aren't aware, Śvetāmbara, I think it's .net, which is Indian PhD JCs,
right.
which, you know, for a lot of good stuff, this sort of cutting edge coming out of India, as opposed to there.
Can you tell us something about the copyright kind of issues?
Sure.
For example, if you're talking about materials that belong to the kind of colonial nationalist period, prior to, say, mid 20th century, say 100 years from 1850 to 1950, the publications that came out. So there's lots of publications. I haven't found any one source that kind of, you know, digitizes all of them. You have a few sporadic issues here or there. There are people who have holdings of all these things. Are they able to freely digitize them and make them available, or are they copyright issues?
So it depends on the publication year. So the question is about copyright for materials from, let's say, the 1850s to mid 1900s. And again, that's a really major concern, but it depends. Okay, so it depends on whose copyright law you're applying. Are you applying the US copyright law, or are you applying, let's say, for example, Indian copyright law? So we have generally used like around 1920, I think it's 1926 at this point. So if you're applying the US copyright law, materials are in the public domain if they're pre-1926. So those can be digitized and presented for open access. But then there's that sort of gray area between 1926 and then, let's say around India's independence. So it really depends on whose copyright law you're applying. There's the Crown copyright that you're applying, for example. But I'm glad to talk to you a little bit more about that. It's definitely, again, fraught with a lot of different considerations. Government documents are usually a little bit more openly available. But if somebody published something like a book, there's different rules. I think it's it's from the date of the author's death plus 70 years is when the copyright duration lasts through.
Neel, I have a question.
Question, yeah.
All right. I see that you have right now these digital archives. I mean, archives are basically within institutions and organizations like that. But are there any room for private collections to be added to this? For example, a lot of people have their own, a lot of digital materials that needs to be digitized, or some of them have already been digitized. For examples, I'm talking about myself. I have about several thousands of images. Some of them have been digitized, but most have not been digitized yet. Is there any room for that to be added to LMU or the South Asian this digitization project?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think personal collections can be considered for digitization. For example, to the South Asia Open Archives, there's a link that you can access to the information page where you can propose materials to digitize. And so then the committee would then review your proposal for digitization. So really, I think the biggest things that are sort of considered with digitization is what's their research value? How rare are they? What condition are they in? Like how much of a need are they for preservation? But yes, I would encourage you to definitely send me some lists of items that you're interested in digitizing, and I can see if there's some good channels to take those through.
All right, will do. Thank you.
And we can take last questions.
I think Deepakji just asked the question. I'm an anthropologist, and I was wondering if you have field notes. I was thinking particularly of field notes, or if you've recorded like oral folk stories kind of things, and you just want to get it out into the public domain. If there was a specific resource for anthropologists to digitize their, I don't know if private collection is the right word, but your ethnographic materials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there may be. Again, I think it would have to really go through a committee to consider that. But I think universities sometimes do that through their digital commons. So if you're affiliated with a university, then the digital commons might be the place for that. But also, you're welcome to contact me, and I can help you sort of route that to the right resource.
Great.
And if anyone else has questions, I know we have to get to the next presenter. I really appreciate this, by the way. Thank you for this opportunity. If anyone else has any questions, you're welcome to email me anytime, contact me. My email is neel.agrawal@lmu.edu. And once again, thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Thank you. The presenters, you can share your screen if you want. Yeah. Can you? Hello, Christopher, can you hear me? Is
Yeah,
there
sure. I
time?
wasn't sure. Am I next?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about the awkward. I wasn't sure who was next. Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
share my screen. I have a short PowerPoint. Can everyone can see that?
Yes, and can you make this look bigger? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
All right, great. We're talking for about, is it 20 minutes?
Yes, 20 minutes. And yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what the thread is that connects my talk to Neel's talk, with the exception that Neel talked about caste-based discrimination, which is essentially what I'm talking about now. I want to take the opportunity to describe an aspect of the ethnographic work I've been doing in India for the past 12 years. My name is Stephen Christopher. I'm starting a Marie Curie postdoc at the University of Copenhagen tomorrow. But at the moment, I'm in Phuket in Thailand. So if for some reason the internet goes down, that's the reason. It's also kind of late here in Thailand. But today I wanted to talk about what I'm calling priestly purity tribal claims near the touchability line. And that's not going to make any sense, but I'm going to explain what this is all about. I've been really motivated by a question that I think is not well addressed in the literature on South Asia. And it's a question about the position of Dalits within scheduled tribes. And there are more than 700 tribes, and there's more than 2,000 petitioning tribes, so communities who are petitioning to get ST status, scheduled tribe status. And scholars have analyzed various aspects of how state recognition or misrecognition or state categories that have colonial antecedents create subjectivity. But we don't actually know, looking across India, out of all of these diverse petitions and diverse tribes, how many have Dalits who are excluded or partially integrated or included or not included in petitions to join the ST community. And that's the point of entry for this research that I've been doing for the past 12 years is I've been working with the Gaddi tribe in Himachal Pradesh, and I'll talk a little bit about the Gaddis. But I just don't know, and I always ask scholars if they have an idea. And I've given, I've talked, I think of like 30 universities. I've talked about this issue of scheduled tribe Dalits, and it just seems to be a thing that's not really being addressed in the scholarship. So if anyone wants to jump in about that, I'd be really happy to hear your thoughts. My basis for interrogating this question is that South Asian sociology on tribe to caste continuum and certain assumptions that have colonial origins about tribal egalitarianism often obscure the dynamics that I'm talking about, and it gets in the way of thinking about what I call tribal multiculturalism, which sounds a little bit like an oxymoron. In the United States, everyone is talking about tribalism. Tribal studies has exploded as a way of talking about partisanship, political partisanship in America. But for me, as a South Asianist, I see tribalization as a fundamentally positive gesture of increasing diversity and multicultural inclusion within tribes by the recognizing Dalits and forms of caste-based discrimination that have been historically obscured. So tribal studies is the study of kind of partisanship, and I'm looking at tribalization processes. And because I focus on spirituality, I'm really interested in religion. I'm looking really in particular about how Indian reservation shapes spirituality. And I don't mean that I think the way that that normally gets addressed is talking about Ambedkarite Buddhism or conversion to Christianity. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are petitioning the state to be recognized as tribal, going through tribalizing spiritualities with regards to witchcraft, with regards to animism, with regards to conversion to things like Radhaswami and Protestantism, and the way in which their subjectivity at a spiritual level is in a recursive loop with state recognition. So very briefly, I just want to talk about the Gadi community. I want to talk about STD, which is a kind of grassroots mobilizing term in the Western Himalayas that means scheduled tribe Dalits, which for many people sounds even oxymoronic. When I really started this research 10 years ago, I talked to some prominent South Asianists. I told them I'm researching tribal Dalits, and they said that's not really even a thing. So that's what I've been interested in, is the emergence of this consciousness in the Western Himalayas. And I'm interested in how ethnicity and subjectivity is shaped by the state, and how identification with these state categories is intensifying despite neoliberalization and the weakening of these categories in terms of how they affect people's everyday lives. And then the last point is how religious conversion, and in this case I'm going to talk about today about caste fracturing or emulation, have unintended consequences. And in this picture, this is a Gadi priest who's a Bhat Brahmin, and he sits on the threshold of the Kwarsi Indranag temple. And in front of him are three Halis who come from the lowest caste, a Dalit caste, and they are barred access from that temple. So they stand on the periphery, and they give and receive prasad from the pujari. So the big picture is I work in Himachal Pradesh, and the Gaddis are transhuman pastoralists. They're kind of famous in India. If you know anything about tribes, Gaddi might be one of the first tribes that pop into your popular imagination about India. The British were obsessed with them, and they've passed into the Indian popular consciousness because of their transhuman pastoralism. I think Gadi Kuttas are having a moment. Modi is into preserving Gadi Kuttas as a kind of unique breed. There's a lot of rhetoric around the laid-back nature of Gaddis, smoking hookahs and hanging out with sheep and doing kind of pastoralism. And so Gaddis traditionally were doing transhumance between Gadaran and Jhandar. Gadaran is the notional homeland of the Gaddis in Bharmor, which is the capital, which is a reserved fifth schedule tribal area. And what I'm going to talk about today briefly is in Jhandar. So I worked in Dharamsala in particular, which everybody knows as the home of the Dalai Lama, but it was a Gadi village before the Tibetans ever came. And in and around Dharamsala, and really in all of Kangra, there's a unique situation where Gaddis were given scheduled tribe status after a multi-decade appeal that became in 1966. It culminated in 2002. And what happened was, it's a long story, but very briefly, Himachal Pradesh, Kangra used to be part of the Punjab, and the British thought that there could be no tribes in the Punjab. And so what happened was Gaddis living in Gadaran were given scheduled tribe status in the first constitutional scheduling. But their kin, who had crossed the Doladar Mountains and settled in the southern spurs in then Punjab, were disenfranchised of scheduled tribe status, and went through this multi-decade appeal, which ended in 2002 when they received scheduled tribe status. But the hitch, is that it only went to Gadi Brahmins and Gadi Rajputs. And so what I look at are 5 Dalit groups who have been integrated, partially integrated into the Gadi tribe for centuries. And they speak Gadi language, they have Gadi culture, they have some Gadi migration histories. There's strict endogamy, so there's little intermarriage between castes, Gadi castes and the other castes. But at the end of the day, they're partially integrated. They self-narrativize as Gadi. They feel as Gadi. They want to be identified as Gadi. And today I'm going to talk about Sippis. And so if you look at this kind of textbook image of the kind of caste configuration as kind of traditionally taught, what I just want to focus in on is that when the state awarded scheduled tribe status to Kangra Gadis, it only went to Rajput and Bhat Brahmins, and it did not go to Sippis, Badis, Dogris, Vihari, and Hali. And you don't need to know anything about them, except that those are 5 castes that have jointly tried to ethnopolitically mobilize to petition the state to be included as Gadi. Okay, so that's what this is all about, is these SC groups are trying to figure out how to come together. Most of them are living in rural environments in Himachal Pradesh. Some of them are doing dangerous work like slate quarry mining. Others are traditional woodworkers. Others are traditional hookah makers. There's musicians. Halis are traditional plowers and tantrics, and they're the lowest because they traditionally were kind of chamars who were working with tanning hides. And Sippis are at the top of, and that's why I call it near the touchability line, because Sippis are traditionally sheep shearers and moved with Gadis in highland pastures. Whereas these other castes were often not allowed to go to highland pastures because they were considered to be polluting, and those are considered to be sacred places where divinities live. And so as a consequence, Sippis position themselves as different than these other SC communities. So these are all 5 of these groups speak Gadi language, identify as Gadi, are excluded from being Gadi by the state, and they fall into the SC quota, scheduled caste quota. But Sippis say, we absolutely are not going to identify as Dalits in order to mobilize to enter the ST quota. Whereas the other groups, especially Halis, are traditionally Dalits, unquestionably Dalits. And so what I'm really addressing in this talk and in my research is, how do these 5 SC Gadi groups, how do they take different strategies which can fracture their ability to unify around a political cause because of caste jockeying among lower caste groups and ways in which they think about themselves as different from each other, and how that reinforces Gadi ideologies that ultimately act as gatekeepers to keep out these SC communities from entering the ST tribe. Okay, so these are the traditional Gadis. About 80% of all Gadis are Rajputs. There's also Bhat Brahmins, but they're a small minority. Like I mentioned, they're very closely associated. Gadis are very closely associated with pastoralism. As pastoralism has receded as a life way, it's become more of a kind of a habitus. So what I mean by that is there are less and less shepherds. They're doing less and less transhumans. There are larger and larger flocks with less and less shepherds. And actually the shepherds are coming in from Bihar and from other states even, because it's considered to be undesirable or dangerous work. And so as the Gadis are, in a sense, withdrawing from transhuman pastoralism, it's become a kind of gatekeeping ideology, a trope about mobility, which separates them from these SC communities, because these SC communities were settled and oftentimes doing kind of sedentary labor in Gadi villages. And so that's the key difference, is that when the Gadis were awarded ST status, it partly was on the basis of their vocation, that they are transhuman pastoralists. And so part of the reason to disenfranchise these other Gadi communities is because they were settled laborers. Well, when you investigate that claim historically, what you find is that there were systems of Haliprata and Jajman relations that kept Halis and Sippis and Badis in bonded servitude in these villages. And so That's part of the reason for their sedentary lifestyle, was that there were various caste-based discriminations that prevented them from flock wealth, from moving up into highland pastures, and from breaking out of Halipratva servitude. What I'm going to talk about in the last few minutes are Sippis in particular. Sippis are at the top of these 5 groups, and they don't identify with the other groups because they think of themselves as having a priestly function among Gaddis. What I mean by that is there's a yearly Mani Mahesh pilgrimage, yatra, and the Sippis are the chelas who are integral to the opening day ceremonies, the rituals, the ablutions, the snan karna that start the Mani Mahesh pilgrimage. And so that is just I'm going to talk about a bunch of reasons that Sippis are separating from these other SC communities, but that's one primary way in which they identify with being Gaddis because of their role in the Mani Mahesh pilgrimage. And they identify with Gaddis on the basis of doing things that Gaddis do. And by that, I mean sheep shearing and moving in the mountains. So the mobility, they say che mihine, means that they're 6-monthers up and down in the mountains based on weather patterns. That functions as an ideology of inclusion, a gatekeeping ideology that keeps out other SC communities. What's at stake if you just zoom back and you say, who cares? What are we talking about? What's really at stake here is the equitable distribution of reservation benefits. Himachal Pradesh has the 2nd most SC population in India, and it's a very competitive quota. And so for these Gaddis who are in the SC quota, they identify as Gaddi, but they're not given ST status. That ST status is about 4 times less competitive than being in the overstuffed SC quota. So there's a bunch of other things that are at stake, including cultural dignity, the ability to participate in reserved elections, to buy property in reserved areas. So there's a whole raft of issues, but just at the most primary level, there's a blatant and well-documented income socioeconomic inequality between high caste Gaddi Rajputs and these SC communities. And I think that the inequitable distribution of reservation is partially accounting for that. So these are the Sippi community that I'm describing. They're traditionally sheep shearers. This is the Hali community. I just mentioned them as a reference point because if the Sippis are the highest of the SCs, then the Halis are by far the lowest because of their traditional work doing. You would think like Hal Chalana, that kind of work, plowing work, is not traditionally associated with being so dirty and across India. But in this specific context, Halis became an actual caste, and that caste became associated with not only chamar work, but with tantra mantra or doing exorcisms. And as a consequence, the combination of those 2 polluting jobs made Halis really excluded from the Gaddi community. So just to spend the last few minutes going into some of the ethnographic details, what's interesting about the Sippis is that they live in 3 places. In Jammu, they live in Jammu, so they're about 40,000 Gaddis have shifted into Jammu Kashmir side. In Jammu, Sippis are scheduled tribe other. What that means is that Gaddis are a tribe and Sippis are a separate tribe. And so I just published an article about this. It's really interesting because in Kangra, they're fighting to join the Gaddi tribe. And in Jammu, they were granted a separate tribe. And when you talk to politicians or Sippis or Gaddis about what that means, really, it's very hard to nail down what it would mean for Sippis to be a separate but culturally allied tribe to Gaddis. Because Sippis exist because of Gaddis, because they do a tertiary vocation that is connected to the Gaddi tribe. So what's going on in Jammu, there's separate scheduling as a tribe. I call it the Or Diwar, the end wall, because Gaddi and Sippi tribes, okay, it's plural, it's not a tribe, there are 2 tribes. So in an article, I investigate what does it mean to have 2 tribes and how is that creating propinquity or distance between Gaddis and Sippis. In Chamba, Sippis have ST status because they live in a ST reserved area. But in Kangra, like I mentioned before, they have SC status, okay? So there's 3 different political statuses of Sippis depending on their location. I don't really think of this as an aberration. I think of this as built into the system, the kind of absurd on the peripheries of reservation. This is happening quite a bit with groups in Punjab that are former criminal tribes and have different statuses in different areas and so on. But Sippis, what I want to just really focus in on for the last few minutes is that Sippis think of themselves as really different than Halis and those other SC communities. They think of themselves as really connected to Shiva, and they think that the name Sippi doesn't come from Silana to sow, it comes from Shiva himself. So it's a Tatbhav. And there's a whole raft of ethnographic material that's behind this, but I've been tracking Sippi autoethnographies, which means from the Sippi community, the writing of ethnographic material to try to narrativize who they are in relationship to state appeals to be granted tribal status. And in those autoethnographies and from years of interviewing ethnic entrepreneurs or ethnic leaders, what emerges is that Sippis reject the Dalit consciousness of those other SC communities for a variety of reasons. One is that they have an ethnogenesis story that Gaddis and Sippis were two brothers who were assigned different roles by their parents, and then they ended up splitting up. This is the Kanta and Rita story. So they have a story of ethnogenesis about how Gaddis and Sippis were one, and then they took on specialized roles because the parents asked them to do different things. This kind of ethnogenesis of allied castes and tribes are really typical across India, and Pocock was writing about this in the 1970s. Another key thing is that Sippis really identify with Trilochan Mahadev, which is a divine ancestor, very important to Gaddis. And the Mani Mahesh Yatra, there are a lot of mythologies and stories about this individual person who was a Sippi. And when Gaddi Rajputs tell this story, they don't emphasize the Sippiness of Trilochan Mahadev. But for the Sippis, it's a hugely important thing that their direct caste ancestor is divine and is enshrined in the Gaddi pantheon and very centrally involved in the Mani Mahesh Yatra. So I look at how Sippis tell the story of Trilochan Mahadev, and they signify on scripture. So this is getting like Vincent Wimbush writes about this with Black interpretations of the Bible. Signifying on scripture means how marginalized and subaltern communities tell and interpret scriptural hermeneutics in a way that flips power dynamics. So I've been recording a lot of oral narratives about Trilochan Mahadev from the point of view of Sippis, about how they tell the story. I mentioned that they have this ritual power because they're the Chelas of the Mani Mahesh pilgrimage. They also do pilgrimage in a different way. So they practice place when they do pilgrimage through the lens of Trilochan Mahadev. So they're doing a Sippified version of this Gaddi ritual. They also have traditional pastoral mobility. And most importantly, maybe in all of these autoethnographies, they remember their history in Barmore as being one of caste equality. And so they flip the narrative because the other SC communities are really emphasizing caste-based discrimination. But Sippis are saying, well, we were actually really included in the Gaddi community, and that's why we should be a part of the tribe. Okay. So very last thing I'll just mention quickly is that there's something going on here with Halis are emulating Sippis. And for all those reasons I mentioned, what they're doing is there are villages that are Hali villages where Halis have amended their caste, doing a caste emendation to change their caste name from Hali to Sippi. And there's a whole subordination of Halis behind it. But what's going on with this caste emulation is that Halis want to be Sippi to get closer to the touchability line so that they can become closer and closer to a Gaddi inclusion in the ST quota. And this has led to a ethnic fracturing among Halis, where in different communities, Halis identify in different ways. And I mean this in an official way. They amend the revenue record to say different caste names. So Halis who joined the Arya Samaj in the 20th century became Aryas. So now they're no longer Halis. They're now stuck in this general caste of Arya. And if they change their name to Sippi now, they're still treated as Halis. They're still treated as subordinate, but they're officially Sippis. And so I've been working with these Hali ethnic entrepreneurs who are going into these villages to encourage Holly converted Sippis to say, listen, we're all one in this problem of how to be recognized as Sippis, as Gaddis, I'm sorry. And the solution is not to say, well, Sippis are the highest SC community, so let's emulate them and try to get onto the coattail of Sippis. They're saying that we should be proud of our Holly identities. We should all emphasize, as Sippis and Hollies and those other castes that I mentioned, that there's this process of tribalization, which is both recognition of multiculturalism within tribes, and it's the recognition of caste-based discrimination within tribes. And so the conclusion that I want to just leave you with is that the work I've been doing with the Gaddis, I think, is generalizable to actually thousands of groups in India, but we don't really know how many. And in the case of Gaddis, and I think in many other communities, there's a very uneven emergence of Dalit and subaltern consciousness among SC Gaddis. There's, of course, state recognition and the inclusion of these Dalit communities in the tribal quota is both a material consideration and a symbolic consideration about everything from justice to equitable distribution to just the basic kind of issue of cultural recognition that somebody like Taylor really talks a lot about. This gets to this issue of the social life of categories, but it really focuses in on spirituality. And then the last point I want to make is that it's really all about multi-sited fieldwork, because there's been 150 years of research about Gaddis. It's very hard to really understand the social structure of Gaddis because people are doing single-sided research. So it's important to be looking in different states and regions and making kind of cross-cultural comparisons. All right, thank you very much. I'm sorry, this is kind of all very inside baseball, so I'm not sure how this connects to the panel overall. But thanks for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Yeah, thanks so much. And looks like we can go to our next presenters. And thank you so much. And if we have time, we can have like a few minutes before 11, because we will have our closing sessions at 11 too. So welcome everybody to join our season. I just put the link in our chat. You can just come to the Zoom link and join us. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Is it me?
Yes, you can share your screen now.
I don't know. What do you want me to do?
Do you have the slides?
No, I don't have any slides.
Oh, you can just go ahead and start talking.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. My talk and topic has absolutely nothing to do with the ones that have preceded, except for the fact that I've greatly enjoyed the intellectual content of both the papers. My interest is relates to media, particularly under the British Empire in India. And my talk today is engaging with broadcasting. So we're looking really at 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you to begin with a very brief potted history of radio in India, very brief, and then highlight a few themes, and they have to be, because of time, very few themes that I think are quite interesting before the Second World War, and then look at the war years to argue, what were the constraints under which broadcasting functioned under the Raj in British India, who were the creative individuals who tried to make a difference, because I passionately believe that if you look at the people behind broadcasting, they really tell you a great deal about the story of broadcasting. So it was much more much less about major policy decisions, and I think far more about the creative interpretation of official policy that was being undertaken by various individuals. Okay, very quickly, prior to 19, use of wireless was the preserve of the government of India. The first radio transmission under private aegis took place in 1921. In the early 1920s, you had various amateur radio clubs developing in Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, and Rangoon. And it was only in 1927 that you had the first private company called the Indian Broadcasting Company that was granted license on lines similar to the BBC to broadcast in India. It opened studios in Bombay and Calcutta, but by 1930, it was struggling and faced closure. The government of India very reluctantly was persuaded that it really needed to step in and take broadcasting over. And therefore, it was in 1930 that broadcasting becomes part of the Department of Industries and Labour in British India. Something called the Indian State Broadcasting Service is set up. And it was only in 1936, so 6 years later, that you had the formal foundation of what we all probably know, All India Radio. It was in 1936. Now, when war broke out, the number of radio sets sold in India, and we're looking at a population of about 300 million, was only about 92,000. In 1943, this had gone up exponentially to about 160,000. So still very small numbers. But my argument is that in so many ways, the Second World War saw politics in India, the relationship between Hindus and Muslims, and so many other aspects that went disastrously wrong. But when it comes to broadcasting, the Second World War really was the making of All India Radio. In 1943, All India Radio's, so I'll call AIR's, new studios was established in Delhi, creating what was referred to as the largest center of broadcasting activity in the East. In 1944, a 100 kilowatt transmitter was established. I know this doesn't mean much to most people, but what this actually meant was that for the very first time, broadcasting from India could genuinely reach overseas audiences, not just all across India. So for example, technically, Indian broadcasts could be picked up and listened to in Britain, as well as, say, in Calcutta, if it was from Delhi. And 1940s also saw the first Indian appointed as the Director General of All India Radio. It also saw broadcasting being given the status of its own department. So you have a department now of information and broadcasting. It wasn't part of some other department. And after the war, you had the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And of course, in 1946, in the elections, you had the first Indian Minister of Information and Broadcasting, Sardar Patel. So there was an exponential increase, if you like, in both the capacity of broadcasting, but also, if you like, the Indianization of All India Radio. But before I come to the Second World War in the 1940s, I'd just like to pick up a few themes of, you know, 1930s. And as I said, you know, I'll have to be really brief. But what's really going on in India in the 1930s? Well, I think the 1930s was marked when it comes to the government's input by a prosaic, hesitant, and abysmal lack of creative policy making. To put it bluntly, the government of India just couldn't be bothered to take broadcasting seriously. Now, why was that the case? I think it was a lot to do with the difficulties of broadcasting. particularly in a country where the technology wasn't present. It was also to do with funding. You needed huge investments in setting up infrastructure, which just wasn't around. In the 1931, you had the Great Depression. A lot of Britons could see the writing on the wall. They probably realized that and some form of self-government and maybe even independence wasn't too far away. There was also a sense that, in a country which it was, assumed was so divided on the basis of language, where there was such a multiplicity of language, but there was so much poverty that people couldn't afford to buy radio sets. So what was the point of broadcasting? What would it achieve? So I'm being very simplistic in putting across, rather detailed arguments. If you're interested, I've kind of written about it in a book published a few years ago in great detail called Communications, Media, and the Imperial Experience. But essentially, let's just give you some examples of how the government of India dealt with broadcasting. So, for example, what about money? What did they do about money? After a great deal of struggle, the government managed to come up with 40 lakhs of rupees, about 300,000 pounds in 1936. Now, this may sound like a lot of money, but it was a drop in the ocean. Compared to England, for example, you need a minimum of 100 lakh of rupees just to set up transmitting stations in India. What about people, appointment of people? Indians were manning the lower rungs of All India Radio, but they were on very poor pay. Their salary, they were not on fixed contracts. They were on temporary contracts till the 1940s. The higher reaches of broadcasting were still manned by people imported from the BBC. So, for example, the controller of All India Radio was a really fantastic individual called Lionel Keelson. The chief engineer was again from the BBC. And of course, the policy of All India Radio was completely controlled by the government of India. So, the fact that broadcasting needed to construct its own frames of reference, this simply wasn't considered either feasible or desirable by the Raj. They also forbade all forms of political propaganda. Indian parties, the Congress, the League, any political parties, they were not allowed to use broadcasting or All India Radio for any form of political propaganda. This becomes quite problematic, particularly in the late 1930s, because as you all know, in 1937, you have elections in India, and 7 out of 11 of the provinces then get controlled by the Congress, and the remaining provinces by a combination of the Muslim League, governments, and other parties. So you've got a situation where the center is being controlled by the British, but the provinces have Indian ministries. So how does the government reconcile this, when you have Indians in power? Well, basically, they refused to reconcile it. They simply said that, well, we cannot use All India Radio for political propaganda. So that was it. Censorship across the board. There was censorship of all kinds. And, I've done so much research. It was so ridiculous at some level because censorship was applied to things like book reviews, to classical music. I just don't have the time to explain how those examples work, but it borders on the ridiculous. But essentially, the government simply wasn't interested in supporting creative input into All India Radio. Now, put against this kind of government reaction, you also had some very keen British appointments in All India Radio, who saw things very differently. And one of them was Lionel Fielden, who I mentioned a few moments ago. And he was from the BBC. He becomes the controller, the first controller of All India Radio. And for several years, he tries very hard to fight against his own countrymen, if you like, against the Raj, in trying to get more Indians on the airwaves, in trying to get more money, in trying to create a culture of radio in India. Ultimately, he fails. He resigns and he leaves in 1939, just before the war. But I think the way I've written about him, you know, the kind of struggle he faces and the arguments he makes to the Raj actually indicate both the potential of radio, but also the obduracy of a Raj that clearly wasn't interested in supporting anything that would allow a creative outlet for India and Indians. But what about the Indians themselves? You know, how did they respond in this period? Again, a very complicated picture, and I'm painting with very broad brushstrokes here. There were many Indians who clearly enjoyed the opportunities for broadcasting, however circumscribed this was. When it comes to creative broadcasting in music or talks or education, you do have people like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, and others who do take to the airwaves. You also have people like Rabindranath Tagore, you know, who's very keen on using the airwaves. Very famously, when the shortwave station was opened in Calcutta in the 1930s, he writes a poem titled Akashvani, which of course then becomes the term that is used after independence to refer to broadcasting. But on the other hand, you had people like Gandhi, and I've written about Gandhi's response to broadcasting. He's very reluctant, and the reasons are complex for this. I think at one level, of course, Gandhi has this view of all technology being a bad thing, but he also has a fundamental, objection to an instrument, as he calls it, that wasn't available to the masses. The poor could never access or afford radio, he's once said. So what's the point of using radio? But of course, the argument is that Gandhi used newspapers, and most, 70% of Indians were illiterate. So you could argue that kind of, what's the point of using newspapers in a country which was largely illiterate? But I'm not going to go down there. But all I'm trying to summarize, and this is really quite complicated, was that the response of political Indians was quite ambiguous too. And this was linked, of course, to the control of radio. Radio wasn't free. Unlike newspapers that were at least potentially on paper allowed freedom of expression, radio wasn't. So I think Indians objected naturally to that. But there was also a certain degree of ambiguity in the use of radio. Now, just to briefly summarize, basically what we see, therefore, before the outbreak of the Second World War is that the imperial narrative of liberal modernity did not extend to broadcasting in India. The Raj's failure to engage with broadcasting stemmed from prejudice, from their desire to control access to this powerful medium and to not allow Indians access. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, actually. There's no ambiguity about it. The creative potential pre-war came mostly from the British, people like Fielden, but also Reith, who of course was the famous Director General of the BBC, who was very, very keen on using broadcasting. It didn't come from the Raj. But of course, what happens, and I'm going to really summarize briefly, what happens during the Second World War are 3 or 4 very important things. Firstly, the war makes India, and particularly after 1942, when Japan was knocking at India's gate. It makes India really critical to the British and Allied propaganda offensive, and therefore to the importance of broadcasting. So All India Radio becomes a key focus of the Raj's use of the airwaves, not just to appeal to Indians, but to try and also appeal to a wider cross-section of world opinion. Of course, they can't do that without actually putting money into All India Radio, without increasing its scope. So new transmitters are set up, a greater degree of technical input is made available, more people are hired, and Indian becomes the Director General in 1943. Secondly, this is also linked to the success that they think that the Axis powers, particularly Germany and Japan, is having in broadcasting to Indians in Indian language. So the language broadcast section of All India Radio also massively increases during the war. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. If you look at the archives, you have All India Radio broadcasting in about a dozen Far Eastern and Southeast Asian languages, including Malay, Chinese, many dialects of Chinese, Japanese, and so on. So it's absolutely fantastic, the picture. And they're doing a fantastic job as well. And the British are very dependent on All India Radio, particularly when Japan captures the Dutch broadcasting stations, after the fall of Singapore and the Dutch East Indies, and also in Rangoon in Burma, when the Japanese capture the medium wave transmitters, they are able to broadcast in Hindustani, in Indian languages, to Indians. So there is that element of combating enemy propaganda. And also, finally, there is a recognition that unless, they actually allow more Indians access to All India Radio, they're never going to win over Indians to the war effort. So they reluctantly are persuaded to open up the airwaves politically too, to increasing amounts of Indian comment. And so by the time you have the end of the war and independence is not far away, All India Radio is really functioning at a very creatively high potential, though you still have a lot of problems. You have great poverty in India, you have a multiplicity of languages, you can't transform a network overnight, so All India Radio struggles, but you also begin to have the political initiative, which comes with Indians taking over broadcasting, which of course they do in 1946 very directly with Sardar Patel. So I'm going to finally conclude because I want to leave time for questions. To say that, in my research, what I found very fascinating is that when India becomes independent and All India Radio is now free in inverted commas, what I find really interesting is that the approach of the Indian government to broadcasting, to this potentially absolutely wonderful medium, is at one level very positive. So, for example, in 1947, of course, you have the partition of the subcontinent. So India is left with 6 radio stations and 18 transmitters. Pakistan gets 3 stations, and India radio only reaches about 11% of the population, but within a couple of years, you have 15 radio stations. By 1949, you have 18 radio stations. So at one level, there is an exponential growth in coverage and money put into broadcasting. But at another level, the mentality, the approach, particularly when it comes to political broadcasting of the new government of India to All India Radio, in many ways is far closer to the imperial Raj than it is to any, I suppose, sense of what we would understand as a free-for-all independent radio network. You know, my final point, I always remember what one American diplomat said about Jawaharlal Nehru, because I think it applies so much to the early approach to broadcasting after independence. He said, Jawaharlal Nehru, the Indian Prime Minister, the first Indian Prime Minister, was the last viceroy to rule India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a wonderful presentation. And does anyone has questions or comments? And we finish around 11 at 11, and then we have our own business. We have music, yeah, and Dr. Chapel and Darcy will have conversations. Right now, one has comments. I had a question. Here, Christopher, can you hear me? Maybe.
Yep, hi, I'm here. I can hear you. Yep, sure.
Computer maybe. The Mac. Yeah. Okay, so I had a chance to visit Dharamshala and Kangra region in Himachal Pradesh. And what I found out from the interaction from the natives was quite mixed and a confused response. Some of them said that they had a lot of land and the government promised them a reservation, SC status, by if they gave up their land to the state. So most of the tribal lands, they said, has been confiscated by the state in lieu of the promise of giving them ST status. So do you can you comment something on the property rights and related issues for the Gaddi tribes and the other tribes that you were talking about?
Yeah, when you say Dharamsala, do you mean Lower Dharamsala or Maklodganj and their interaction with Tibetans?
Yeah, yeah.
You mean Upper Dharamsala?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think what you're getting at is a multi-decade resentment that Gaddis have towards Tibetans. And I've published about this. There have been some high-profile murders and rapes and acts of communal violence between Gaddis and Tibetans. And Dharamsala is a smart city now, and property is exploding in Dharamsala, and Gaddis are benefiting a lot from Tibetans, because Tibetans are the reason that Dharamsala exploded on the tourist map. They're building a mega Buddha amusement park in Dharamsala in Kaniara. And so the Dalai Lama was part of they called it Divine Dharamsala. It was the smart city planning for the petition to win the competition. They beat Shimla. But what's going on is that in the 1980s and 90s, a lot of Gaddis sold their property to Tibetans before the big boom in tourism. And so after the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize, and parts of Maklodganj became very expensive. Those were Gaddi areas that Gaddis had sold that property to Tibetans. And so I think what you're getting at is not resentment towards the state so much as it is ethnic tension between Gaddis and Tibetans. And so sometimes Gaddis blame politicians, but behind that is a deeper issue about lack of sociality between Tibetans and Gaddis. There's very little intermarriage. There's very little sociality between Gaddis and Tibetans. There's been various points, kind of embargoes on Tibetans and Gaddis frequenting each other's shops or using each other's taxis. There's been a couple of high-profile murders, including one just a couple of years ago. So Dharamsala is a really fraught place, and it's a very tight place with a lot of really expensive real estate. That was all a Gaddi village. Before it was Maklodganj, it was called Talu by the Gaddis. And so that's in their minds that they're benefiting from Tibetans, and they recognize the benefit that the Tibetans have brought them. they're also pissed off that they sold their property to Tibetans before the big boom. So I think that's what you're probably seeing when you go to Meklodganj. Thanks for your question. It's a great one.
Thank you. Thank you,
Can I
everyone.
ask another question? Yeah. Hi, Stephen. I think that was a very interesting talk, excellent talk. I had a couple of, one question and one comment. The question was, you used the phrase transhuman pastoralism. At least that's what I heard, transhuman pastoralism. So the question was, what does that mean? I've never heard that kind of use of the term transhuman. So
not transhuman, but the French transhumant.
Transhumant.
Yeah, it means seasonal migrations based on weather patterns.
Okay. Good, thanks. That clarifies that. And the other comment was about the Vishwakarma caste, which is really a kind of a pan-Indian. It's not really a scheduled tribe as such. It's pan-Indian, but they occupy a kind of a liminal space in the caste system. They're considered kind of essential to the making of images, but they're not really part of the caste system. So they're trying to, there's a variety of practices where they're trying, some of them are calling themselves Vishwakarma Brahmin, for example. And some of them, I mean, they have their own, sort of myths and legends. So from this point of view of spirituality and creating their own sorts of identities that weave into the, census-making devices of the modern nation. I think, do you think that that would be something similar to what you're talking about at a more micro level?
Yeah, the Vishwakarma case I don't know in particular, but I think I would what my dream is to put together a large database that looks at all of these as discrete case studies, because I think that we don't know on the fringes of tribes, and there are thousands of groups petitioning to become tribes, and there's so much fracturing in those petitions about, are people Brahmins and they're identifying priestly aspects, or are they Dalits and they're identifying caste-based discrimination as the basis for inclusion? So I just would like to know, and I think that we don't know. I've talked to people like Alpa Shah, Sarah Schneiderman, some of the key people in studying affirmative action, and really we don't know. I think nobody knows. So I'm going to check out Vishwakarma, but I'm trying to just talk to scholars. People have suggested look at the Jaunsari in Uttarakhand, and in Leh Ladakh there are a couple of groups, Ladakhi groups, that have tribal Dalits. The Gorkhas in Darjeeling have tribal Dalits. So it's very kind of hodgepodge, and I'm not sure that we know. But potentially there's hundreds or thousands of groups like this.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Does the term tribal Dalit sound weird to you?
Not after I heard your talk. It sort of makes sense. Everything makes sense now. But it does sound weird. I mean, on the face of it, it does sound weird.
Yeah. Sometimes I have debates with Indian historians and sociologists who just say that that's an oxymoron, that can't exist conceptually.
Right.
Yes.
I had a question for Dr. Kaul. Are there old recordings of the All India Radio that are available, or were they recorded?
Well, unfortunately, very few, which is a real tragedy. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why I don't think there's enough research, on broadcasting, till date. But my experience certainly of Delhi and archives, in the headquarters, if you like, of the former All India Radio, Akash Bharti and so on, was that there was absolutely nothing I could get, which was pre-late 1940s.
Didn't the BBC have a tradition of, even when they were using tape, destroying the tapes into the 60s and 70s?
Well, yes, you see, the thing is, my talk today was focusing on All India Radio, but I'm also researching on my next book actually is on the BBC. So I have gone into the BBC side of things as well. But one of the things that the BBC did do that I am looking at in my book, in my next book, is even if you don't have the actual, even if you don't actually have the tapes, you do have typed transcripts. But not for everything, because there was a lot of bombing during the war. So a lot of material was lost in fires, for example, in London. So it's not a full archive, but it is so much better than what you have, in my experience, what you have in India, in Delhi. But I hope to go across the COVID, the whole COVID situation has made it quite difficult. But my next trip to India, I'd like to go to Bombay or Mumbai and Kolkata, and also Madras, and see what is available there.
Are there audio libraries that would have the recordings?
I don't believe that there are audio libraries, no. But what does exist, for example, I did buy quite a few of these, are CDs of, for example, something I'm working on for another project on Gandhi. So, for example, the speeches of Gandhi, because as you know, Gandhi, particularly after independence, Gandhi allowed all his evening prayer sessions to be recorded by All India Radio, and then it was transmitted. So it was first recorded. So because it was first recorded before transmission, you actually had the recordings. So I have actually bought, and so that is possible to do. So to buy tape CDs like that.
Yeah, that publication came out about 13 years ago. It was a book and audio set of all his works.
Yes, correct. So are you working in this field?
I used to sell that.
Well, well, you're a man I need to talk to.
Oh, okay.
I need to contact.
Yeah.
No, seriously, let's do that. Let's try and email, because I'd love to find out more about what you know, and because I'm sure my ignorance is vast.
Hello, everyone. So sorry to make this. So we need to transfer to our closing seasons at 11 o'clock. And if you want, you can just keep in this room, and I will be moved forward to another classroom.
Okay, can I just say, how do I get Ajit Kaul's contact details?
I can tell you.
Okay. And is that, how do you pronounce your surname?
Kaul, same as yours.
So it would be, so is that the same as my surname?
Yeah.
I thought it was, but I wasn't sure because it's K-O-U-L.
Yeah, it's the same name. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I can send it. I can email you. You can tell me your email. I'll email you just now.
Okay, I'm sorry if this is boring everyone else. But I did have a question for Stephen, but I'll just give you my email first. It's CK, my initials CK, and then the number 24 at St. Andrews, ST dash Andrews with an S at the end.
Okay, got it.
.ac.uk.
All right, I'll send you an email. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Radhi.
Sure, thanks.
Great.
Chandrika, I put my email also. I typed it out. So if you want to get in touch with me, please do.
Okay, shall I do that? Are we going off air now? Okay.
I think we're gonna get kicked out. I think so.
Okay, it's just that my mom wrote a really seminal book on the Gaddis 20 years ago. So I just wondered if you had.
I had a feeling she was your mom. Yeah, I've talked to her
Okay.
before. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, good. Let's keep in touch. Sounds like you're going to be in the right across waters. You're going to be in. Did you say the Netherlands?
Yeah. No, in University of Copenhagen.
Copenhagen. Sorry, Denmark. Okay. Well, that's across the waters.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
Can you send me just send me a short email and let's be in touch and let's meet
up. Okay, good.
Well, our paths will cross. I'd love to talk about your mom's work too.
Okay, good. My mom's here actually, visiting at the
Okay.
moment.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, good luck.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
What do we do now? How do we go to the last session? I don't know.
I think we leave. I think they can bump us, or we can leave and just put in the new.
Do we leave this session now?
I thought it was in this room though. It's just,
Oh, it's here.
It's the same link.
Yes.
Is
Hi,
it the same?
Chandrika.
Oh, hi.
We're going to start the final session momentarily. And thank you all for being so patient.
Okay, so Chris, do we stay on? I mean, or do we exit?
No, you just stay on to hear the
Okay.
final session and to hear the music. Music is best.
Thank you so much. It will help.
So thank you for your patience. We have a couple of more people that are coming into the Zoom room and a couple more people that are coming into the room. And what we're able to do in this final session is to, there's a very important person. My wife just entered. So come on up here. You have a seat right next to Pratima. And we are very happy to welcome Navin Doshi to this final session. And as you've seen in the program, he will share his own story with you. But I do want to express our gratitude to Navin, who is here with me. We are both here for all of the support over the years. And I also want a couple of people that aren't in the room to be in the room, but perhaps better said when it can be said, but particularly Lane Werrett, who has been remarkable in really shepherding us through the Zoom experiences, as well as doing what is needed. Come in. We have a number of other people entering. We have chairs up in the front. Please come close. Please come close. Come close, David. Come to the front. And Alex, we have chairs right here for you.
We found it.
You found it. Very good. Very good. So an array of thanks to all of the people that showed up live, all of the people that showed up on Zoom. I want also to thank Lane Werrett, who is our chief engineer behind all of this. I want to thank Cynthia Beck and Neel Agrawal from the Special Collections Division of the Hannon Library here at LMU. I want to give a second thanks to Lane Werrett because she just walked into the room. Thank you, Lane. I want to also thank Shuo and Christine and Alex and all of the other wonderful, and Zylo, who I see down there, all of the wonderful graduate students who have been helping make certain that all of this is as best as it can be given the circumstances. And in this final session, we will first hear for about 15 minutes from Navin, and then we will hear music. And I urge all of the Zoom people to leave the music on because this ensemble is absolutely remarkable. And then we'll be eating all here in the room. Food will be brought in. And if you choose to eat at home and watch us eat, you're welcome to, but that would be a little bit weird. So we may close the meeting off after the music. And again, I want to thank also the Board of Trustees, all listed there for the South Asia Studies Association. They've been working for a full year pulling this all together. And even though, as I commented earlier, we have lots of ghosts, we can at least see your name, if not your face, on the screen. And we're more than happy to have all sorts of people in the room, including our Zoomers, our Zoom booths. Okay, so Naveen.
Okay, so I want to thank Chris, of course. I couldn't find a better partner in doing philanthropic work in the educational matter. Chris is one. I also have another good professor, Debashis. So I would like Chris to read my presentation, half of it, because I have a limited endurance, shall I say, before I get in trouble. So Chris, you're going to read from her right here.
Very
Jimmy
good.
Carter.
To Jimmy Carter. Okay, I get to call out Jimmy. And I got to see my good friend, Mary Evelyn Tucker, interview Jimmy Carter at the American Academy of Religion. It was really quite a treat. So I'm the ventriloquist. The words are coming from his mouth. This presentation is a 62-year retrospective about Southern California. Navin, I, arrived here into the United States, 1958 to Michigan and 1960 to Los Angeles. People who were raised starting from the 1930s worldwide were greatly affected by the idealism of the freedom movement in India. Certainly, for Gujaratis, Gandhiji's idealism of Satyagraha affected most of us. I was fortunate to walk with the Mahatma, along with my parents and a few others for about an hour. That was in Panchgani in 1946, when I was about 10 years old. I also experienced the Mumbai naval uprising in 1946. That was probably one of the reasons British decided to free India. Another reason was the external pressure put by FDR on the British before agreeing to help them in the Second World War. US Christians had advocated for India's freedom because of the Mahatma. They saw Christ's image. I spent 2 years in Ann Arbor receiving a bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering. Well, that was fast. And normally they asked every Indian student to take a test for English. And the majority would have to take an English class. And the test would include many questions and a written essay. They passed me with a story that I wrote about the Mahatma's freedom movement. Local Christian churches and small businesses provided part-time employment if a student needed extra money. I was proud to earn money for the first time in my life cleaning the church floor. There was a Chinese student also working for the church who was missing for a month. Later, he was discovered hiding in the church, afraid to get deported since he was broke. The church helped him by raising money to complete his studies. Vegetarians did not have much choice in 1958, and I gained about 20 pounds in a month, consuming donuts, French fries, and here it is, milkshakes. There was no pasta, but it was then called macaroni and spaghetti. And pizza was the leaning tower. Okay, he leaned into the pizza. Shakey's Pizza appeared in the late 1950s. Rice was only to be found in milk, pudding. Yogurt, and I know this myself, yogurt, come close, yogurt did not exist. And the closest was sour cream. Oil, like cooking oil, well, no, that's for lubrication of a car. Fat was for cooking. Sugar was white gold, and cube sugar was very posh. Whiskey a go-go was scotch and prune juice. and I had to read this twice. You never saw elbows or hats on the dining table. Okay, manners. I came to Los Angeles in 1960 to initiate a PhD program in engineering, to start studying engineering, PhD at UCLA. A small company offered me a job working on creating solar cells and semiconductors. And I accepted the job with a yearly pay of $7,200. And in 1960, yes. Compare this with the pay, $80,000 offered to fresh graduates today. Economically, America was the envy of the world with its very broad middle-class population, thanks to President FDR. Back then, a husband's wages were sufficient to support a family of 4, owning a house, wife, and 2 children. In 1961, the visiting Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru, was asked a question at UCLA about the perceived socialistic policy he was following for India. His answer was simple. These are Nehru's words. We are trying to catch up with America to expand the middle class, employing both private and public enterprises. California was the most desired place for immigrants because of its climate and a strong, diverse economy. Among the intellectual population in the West, there was a great deal of curiosity about Indian mysticism. The first Indian mystic to visit America was Swami Vivekananda, representing Hinduism at the first Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893. The Vedanta Society of California was founded in 1930 in Hollywood. A high-profile gay playwright, Christopher Isherwood, was among the first to embrace Vedanta. He felt a true freedom from the Puritan morality of Victorian England. Paramahansa Yogananda was the first yoga master to become a permanent resident of Los Angeles. His book, Autobiography of a Yogi, published in 1946, created a spiritual revolution. He taught the path of self-realization and founded the organization Self-Realization Fellowship, SRF. Out of 7 SRF centers, only 1 in the whole world has preserved the ashes of Mahatma Gandhi. The only place where we can find Mahatma Gandhi's ashes outside India is right here in Pacific Palisades. And during Yogananda's visit to India, he received Mahatma Gandhi as a disciple, learned the techniques. The large man-made lake with families of floating swans within a mile of the shore of the Pacific Ocean, this posh area was, according to some, donated to Yogananda by Maharaj Gaikwad of Baroda. The Maharaj owned a very large amount of land from Bel Air to the shore of the Pacific, probably worth hundreds of billions today. However, most of it was taken away by the state, since the Maharaja did not pay his property tax. Jiddu Krishnamurti, born in South India, was discovered by the Theosophical Society and raised under the guardianship of Annie Besant. Associated with the Theosophical Society, a co-founder of Banaras Hindu University, and a founding member of the Indian National Congress, she and others saw in Krishnamurti a potential world teacher. The current Hollywood Bowl, with a capacity of 18,000, was rented by the Theosophical Society to accommodate all the people who wanted to hear Krishnamurti teach. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a physicist and a scholar of the Vedas, founded Maharishi International University in Iowa. The university imparts consciousness-based education, including techniques of meditation and ancient practices of Ayurveda. During my time in Los Angeles and before in India and Ann Arbor, the majority of us were involved with politics. Most South Asians seem to be in favor of Democrats, although the majority of American publications in the 1960s leaned toward more conservative opinions. We South Asians had a natural attraction toward JFK during the first presidential election that we experienced. We were delighted when he was nominated and then elected. And earlier, we had a terrible opinion of John Foster Dulles, who was critical of India's stand as a neutral country. JFK had cultivated good relations with elder statesmen like the French President de Gaulle and Prime Minister Nehru. He had sent his First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, to France and India as a goodwill ambassador. He also tried to help settle the India-Pakistan problem. He had offered to help India when China invaded in 1962. He was on the path toward permanent peace with the Soviet Union after the Cuban Missile Crisis. America suffered in many ways when the country experienced the assassinations of three good leaders, RFK, JFK, MLK. The CIA, created by John Foster Dulles, had been instrumental in killing these leaders, not only in America, but also abroad. Author and Wayne State University Emeritus Professor Modi Nassani has documented 40 CIA planned domestic assassinations over the past 5 decades. We're almost to Jimmy Carter. Nixon was probably one of the most disliked presidents among the South Asian community because he sent the 6th US Navy fleet to the Bay of Bengal during the Bangladesh War. Nixon supported Pakistan. I would speculate that the two most liked US presidents were JFK and Jimmy Carter. Why? They did not wage war during their presidencies.
I don't know, maybe you ought to keep reading. Because Anyway, let me try at least for a few minutes, see how it goes. In matters of economics, the 1970s were chaotic thanks to overspending on the Vietnam War. The culprits were President Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. In matters of war, an Arabic saying goes like this: peace makes wealth, wealth makes arrogance, arrogance makes war, wars make poverty, poverty makes humility, humility makes peace. It seems to conform to the laws of karma and the cyclical nature based upon Lord Shiva's dance of creation and destruction. In my opinion, there are two presidents who are most responsible for destroying the middle class. Nixon unanchored the dollar from gold, initiating a decade of terrible inflation. Using gold as an anchor, the price of gold had risen from $40 in early 70s to over 700 per ounce in early 80s. Federal Chairman Walker had to raise the interest rate of government bonds to around 15% to bring the inflation in control. Nixon was also the initiator of job transfers to China. The confidence in the government started to go down also due to the Watergate corruption. The economy started to grow during the Reagan years, but both parents needed to work to keep up the same standard of living. I believe traditions are valuable in raising children. Church participation and parent supervisions went down. The second president responsible for destroying the middle class, in my opinion, is Clinton. He repealed the Glass-Steagall law of banking, creating the destruction of small businesses. Banks with deep pockets started to compete in almost every business. He also sold precious technology to China. More high-paying jobs went to China. The Clintons were able to raise money of over $1 billion within a decade for their foundation, I believe, selling favors. America's economic strength got further degraded due to events in President George W. Bush's and Obama's presidency. 9/11 terror attack resulted in unnecessary and tragic wars in the Middle East. The mortgage bond default crisis in 2007 and 8 broke down the Wall Street. When Donald Trump announced that he was running for president of the United States, the comedians were delighted. Mainstream media had Jeb Bush as frontrunner with the most money at hand. John Oliver of HBO challenged them. Do it. Look at my eyes. Just do it. I'll donate some money. We'll have plenty of funny stuff. The audience started to laugh. Seth Meyer of NBC, guys, Trump is running. He's joking. He cannot be serious candidate because he's a clown. The audience laughed louder. Trump was thought to be like comedian Pat Paulson. I don't know if anyone would remember that. Pat Paulson, who ran 5 times during 1970s through early 1990s. There were a total of 17 candidates from the Republican Party. Comedian Bill Maher asked the question to his mostly liberal panelist, who has the best chance to get the nomination? And Coulter of Fox News confidently answered almost immediately, Donald Trump. After a few seconds of silence, the panelists, looking at each other, laughed the loudest and longest along with the audience. Come July 2016, Trump had defeated all the 16 Republican candidates. A few candidates supported by the establishment declared never Trump. Come November 8th, polls indicated that Hillary was a shoo-in because the first woman president of the United States. The odds were over 80% in her favor around 7 p.m. Los Angeles time during the election day. The results started to come in one state at a time. When Ohio and Florida went in favor of Trump, around 9 p.m., odds changed from 80% to 50-50, and changed again to 80% in favor of Trump when Wisconsin was declared in Trump's favor. It was all over by 11 p.m. when Trump was declared the president-elect. Against all odds, Trump defeated Hillary, supported by the establishment constituted of elites, neocons of both Republican and Democratic parties, elites of big banks and the Wall Street, mainstream media, Hollywood elites, most minority organizations, and leaders of most West European countries. This was a victory against all odds, much bigger than the victory of Narendra Modi in India, defeating all major party candidates. This was the victory voted by Hillary's 50% deplorable, but beaten down, nameless, forgotten working staff who used to be part of the largest and widest middle class of yesteryears I had described, admired by many world leaders, including the late Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. In words of the documentary filmmaker and Hillary supporter Michael Moore, showing the middle finger, the Trump victory will be the biggest ever screw up to the establishment in recorded human history, and it will feel so good. These are the people having literally nothing much to lose, but a precious right to vote. Whether Trump delivered to them or not was irrelevant, since these are the people at the bottom of the barrel, probably divorced, losing wife and children, with their home foreclosed by bankers. America and the West are ruled by 4 oligarchic blocs, corrupting the government. This is my opinion. The first bloc includes the military-industrial complex and pharmaceuticals. Departing President Eisenhower in 1960 had warned the country about their influence. The second bloc is constituted of social and print media companies. They have become the gatekeepers of news and stories they prefer to release to the public. The third bloc is constituted of oil, gas, and other sources of energy producers. And the fourth bloc, most powerful of all, is constituted of groups of symbiotic finance, insurance, and real estate. This bloc is the successor to Europe's most feudal land aristocracy. These blocs are also known as rentier sectors dominating post-industrial capitalism. Rentiers implies just creating, it's not creativity, but mostly ownership of land and other income producing holdings. The Federal Reserve prints money like there is no tomorrow. The freshly printed money flows into the sector of their choosing. Inflation be damned. In the end, all wage earners and pensioners suffer. I believe almost all developing countries are being taken advantage of by the hegemony of the dollar. We were able to exchange a dollar for about 4.5 rupees in 1950s. Now they are using technology and war power to get over 75 rupees for a dollar. So how are we, the South Asians, doing today as opposed to the treatment of 60s and 70s? I came across an article titled Indian American Virus and No Vaccine to Treat. The article, written by Eugene Grant, argues that Indo-Americans are emerging as the intellectual vanguard of the American left. The social media companies, constituted of Indo-American CEOs and imported workers from India in large numbers, shut out the conservative views. New CEO of Twitter, Agrawal, has stated that we need to implement occurring changes changes due to technology, and not to be concerned about the First Amendment, the First Amendment, first right. There is a perception that these CEOs are importing their countrymen to colonize companies and drive out highly paid white workers. The Biden administration has become more unpopular, even among Democrats, is because they see that his administration is packed with Asians. We need to be careful not to be associated with American downfall for a few years to come. They had declared a war on COVID. They prevented using FDA-approved drugs like ivermectin. Other countries were able to save lives because of COVID is a treatable virus. We could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. America has been working on a bioweapon for many decades. John F. Kennedy refused to fund development of bioweapons during his presidency as early as in 1960s. All wars are inflationary. We are experiencing the strongest start of inflation in 2022, around 144% annualized. This is not just only the highest, it's 3 times higher than the next high of 60% during Yom Kippur War and during Second World War. Ukraine war created monetary earthquake and will cause world economic slowdown. And it will cause liquidity crisis. It is good idea for us to hold more cash. Today, South Asians in America wield great influence. SASA can help us understand a great deal about our past, present, and future. Thank you, friends, and may God save us and our adopted country. Thank you and greetings.
So we go out musically. Thank you all.